Hey guys, welcome out to Revolution. We're going to continue looking at the Bart Ehrman Jennifer Knust video, How to Translate the Bible, Problems and Pitfalls. So this is part 2 of that. And so I'm just going to check the audio straight away.
It's incredibly complicated. There's we could take an entire podcast and we still wouldn't understand what the heck they're talking about. And
Okay, so all right, but when your committee or
okay, so it is working. If you haven't watched the last video, I encourage you to go back and watch that to get the context of this, because in a lot of videos I always assume that someone's just tuned in and they don't realize we're in the middle of something. But I'm not going to continue to do that in a lot of these videos that I do from now on, because I find that it just becomes repetitive, and especially if I'm doing a series and I'm doing like 8 videos, people jumping in the middle and just saying, well, why have you said that? And it's like, well, go back and look at the context. But I know that some of my videos are quite long-winded. They're quite long, so that will help keep them a little bit shorter. So I'm just going to jump straight right into this. And so we've got about half an hour left. And so surprisingly, I got through half an hour last time. So let's just continue and see what Jennifer Knust and Bart Ehrman have to say about the problems and pitfalls of translating the Bible.
Or any committee. So we don't, but just when a committee of translators sits down, they're not like deciding on the Greek text for Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, right? They've got an edition in front of them they've got something in front of them they're actually translating.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, that's right. So the mandate of the NRSV updated edition was actually to use the most recent text critical editions. Okay. So that would be, for our purposes, the one that's produced in Germany is the Nestle Aland 28, or in the United States would be the UBS, United Bible Society 5th edition, I believe. And then in this other work that's been going on called the Editio Critica Maior, which is this massive project that's being undertaken in Germany, where all the texts of all of the books of the New Testament over time are being gradually reconsidered, and they haven't all been finished. So book editors who had all of that information available were sort of their part of their mandate was to review that. And also Mike Holmes, the general editor that I worked with, had produced his own critical edition, the SBL Greek New Testament, and that was also to be consulted. So decisions were to be made. Text critical decisions were made by individual book editors, and then we as general editors would look at that. And one of the reasons why I was, I think, asked to be one of the general editors is, although I do not and never will produce a critical edition of the New Testament, I know how the textual critics who are working today, how they do their work, and so I was able to tell, make suggestions.
So I mean, the basic, I mean, for the basic line is somebody can go online and buy a Greek New Testament, and almost everybody's going to get a Greek New Testament that's pretty similar to every other Greek New Testament. There'll be some differences, but where there are important differences, the committee has to decide which Greek version do I follow, which Greek text do I follow here, and different committees might decide different things. Like they might.
Exactly.
So there are some famous instances where most translation committees are going to agree that, yeah, those verses were not originally in there, even though they're in the King James.
Yes.
And there are other times where text critics can't decide. Well, in Luke 22, when it says that Jesus was in deep agony before his being arrested, and he's sweating great drops as if of blood. So it's a sweating blood passage. Some manuscripts have that, and some don't have it. And so a translation committee just has to decide which side do we think is right. Exactly. And
I doubt that any translation committee would talk about those type of verses. Usually translation committees aren't looking at the Textus Receptus. Now, in some of the larger passages, a woman caught in adultery, or the last 12 verses of Mark. Now, these, but Dan Wallace has said that they should, in modern versions, just simply delete these, because these are double bracketed in the NA 28, Nestle Aland 28 edition. And so really they should be deleted. They should be chopped out of the Bible. But apart from those huge, because it's almost like deleting, something the length of a book in the Bible, like 2nd John or 3rd John, or these books are like 12, 13 verses. We're looking at 12 verses. Last 12 verses of Mark. Pericope adulterae is 12 verses, and so to sort of hide the fact that they're doing this, that they're deleting these huge, massive chunks of scripture, and also because there's such an outcry when they try and do this type of thing from the church, that they keep these in there. But most of these other things that Bart Ehrman mentioned wouldn't even get a look into. If you're doing an edition from the NA28, usually you're given over to that type of methodology. The SBL text, I doubt that would be really any different to the NA28 in substantial differences. The UBS 5, I'm pretty sure it's exactly the same text, but it's just a different type of apparatus. And so, but you do have Tyndale House text, and so you might be jumping between them. And this is the thing, people say, well, go to the Greek, and then you go to the Greek, and there's a whole ton of Greek ones. Do we go with the majority text? Do we go with the Textus Receptus? Do we go with the NA 26, 27, 28? Which edition do we go with? There's 28 editions of them. Do we go with the Westcott and Hort text? Do we go with the Tyndale House text? Do we go with the SBL text? Do we go with the Hodges and Fasted majority text? Do we go with the Pierpont, Robertson Pierpont majority text? Do we go? Where do we go for the Greek text? And so this is the problem. A lot of Christians, usually someone like Mark Ward comes along and oversimplifies everything. We're all got the same type of Bibles and they're all got the same type of readings. No, the versions are very different, and also the Greek texts underlying these Bibles are very different. And so if you were to look at, say, the NA28 edition, that is 2,900 less words than what's in the Textus Receptus Greek. If you look at the changes, the amount of changes is 8,000 changes. So that's a lot. That's not a small amount. That's quite a lot of words changed and deleted, and let alone things that are added as well. There's many additions. And so a lot of these have to do with doctrine. They have to do with places where the Trinity is involved, the deity of Christ is involved. So this is a problem. And so here you have Bart Ehrman, Jennifer Knust saying that you just sort of, you go to these Greek texts and you just sort of pick and choose. But Bart Ehrman, he is then sort of expressing a little bit of ignorance. He's saying, so you will reject the King James text and you'll reject this and that. And it's like, that's almost like a no-brainer. If you are going to translate from the NA 28 edition, you have already crossed that line a long time ago. You're not even considering King James readings to be in the Bible. I mean, you might prefer something like that, but if you're going to sit on a committee where everyone is committed to sticking as close to the NA28 as possible, and you say, hey, I want to put in the Comma Johannium, they'll all just look at you sideways and go, who's the new kid? So Bart Ehrman's saying that it's just sort of, he, I guess in a way he's blurring Bibles together. He's got and this is what he does in his books. He oftentimes will bring up issues which to most critical text people are not even issues anymore. These things have been settled by them for a long time, but he'll bring up the Comma Johannium and say, that should be considered or shouldn't be considered or whatever, and then he thrives on that type of controversy. So let's just continue and let them speak.
And then translate it or not, and maybe have a footnote. Do they put footnotes for that kind of thing?
Yes. So when there were something like a split decision in among the textual critics who are operating in this particular framework of like European and North American modernist textual criticism, when there was split decisions among the text critics around something, then yes, you'll see something like other manuscripts or other, I forget how we had it. We had a special set of words that we would use that indicate that there's different readings in different manuscripts. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So you're translating this Greek. So, and
the thing is, like someone like James White, he's like, well, the Word of God is found in the NA28 edition and in the apparatus. Now, if you know anything about the apparatus, I've got the NA28 edition on my phone. I should really copy it onto my computer. But what I'll quickly do, I'll just grab it and I'll just show you the apparatus. I'll show you like a snapshot. I'll just go to a random page and hopefully you can see it. It should be quite easy if I enlarge this screen. Okay, so I think you can see that. So that is Matthew chapter 13. So obviously you got verse 1, 2, and that's verse 3 there. So this is the apparatus down the bottom here. And so you have, this manuscript here, these ones, 579, 700, TR, and it's got a Greek word. It's really hard for me to hold that still with my left hand zoomed right in like that. But when you look at it, it's there's a lot of choices, and sometimes, and this isn't comprehensive either, that there's a lot of manuscripts that say different things. But usually you sort of have to go with these readings at the bottom. You go with the text, or you can go with the readings at the bottom. And so it's a bit of a smorgasbord. You can sort of create your own text as you go, sort of thing. Like you imagine doing this with something important like the Constitution of the United States. Imagine you had the Constitution. Then down the bottom was a whole bunch of commentary of what people thought about it. And some people didn't like the Second Amendment, and so they're writing against it, saying, oh, it shouldn't relate to modern day weapons. It should only relate to muskets and things like that. And so they've got their own opinion, and so they want to but you can get those type of opinions and just throw it over the Constitution, and you can print your own thing and go, there it is. That's our Constitution. That's what originally was meant. And or you can just have a dynamic equivalence where you don't have to translate it formally, word for word, as close as possible. You can bring it across in certain ways that 3 or 4 Greek words can equal 15 English words if you want, or you can just chop those out. And so this is the thing. It's when you put it into other contexts, like say the Constitution, other important documents, say like the Magna Carta, Constitution, Bill of Rights, even like here in Australia, the Australian Constitution. There are a lot of important legal documents where people rest laws upon, and the whole of society functions around these type of things. And when you go to Parliament, or when you go to like the House of Representatives or Congress or whatever in the United States, these documents are very important. But it seems that people think that the Bible can have all these different representations. And so imagine if I said, there's 40 different types of the Constitution of the United States, or there's 40 different types of writings explaining what Abraham Lincoln said at the Emancipation Declaration, where he declared the slaves to be free. Imagine saying that they said certain words, or certain words were cut out, deleted, whole entire sentences, maybe 12 whole verses of text, maybe a whole paragraph of text just deleted, chopped out. I mean, we wouldn't want that in any text. And we know modern media does this. We know you get the interview with someone and they'll hold the mic to their mouth while someone's just chattering over the top of them and saying what they've said. So, this politician recently just said this, and they'll say 1 or 2 words and that's it. And you think, I'd really love to hear the context of that, because you just know you can't trust the media. And this is the problem with modern Bibles. You can't trust them. And this is why I tell people to get away from this mess of all these modern Bibles, because you just simply can't trust them. They're just being found to be lying a lot of the time, and just saying the wrong thing, translating it the wrong way. Even just that, if I found out that they were translating things wrong, I'd say, well, let's look somewhere else. But let alone sometimes they're deceptive in the way they're translating things, or they prove that they're lying in their preface with the amount of translators that worked on the job. Like you think, you see a mistake and you think, well, surely not everyone on the committee made that mistake. Why are they saying they've got all these translators? Did they make such a silly mistake like that? And then when they're introducing, contradictions and errors, you just think, well, these people obviously don't know the Bible. And so in this picture here, you're looking at Jennifer Knust and Bart Ehrman. These people, I mean, you would not want them near your church or anything like that. These people are completely out of the kingdom of God. They're absolutely heretical, absolutely to the back teeth heretical. And so, but they're both discussing what it's like to work on Bible translation, because these are the type of people who do these modern Bible translations. And so, people, like, usually I give people the benefit of the doubt and I say, okay, let's look at the New King James. Well, Dan Wallace said that not one of them was a TR advocate. Not one person who worked on the New King James advocated for the Textus Receptus. And, Farstead, him and Hodges, they did their majority text because that's what they think is the Word of God. James Price, he was the main overseer for the Old Testament. He said he was a critical text guy. And you just you're left there thinking, well, why are they actually doing this? It's quite a strange thing when you see there's a lot of majority text people popping up lately, and they're like, we want to fix the Textus Receptus. We want the Textus Receptus to have these marginal readings. We want to produce a TR with this and that. And it's like, why? why are you so interested in a text that you think is not original? And the thing is, you say, okay, so where is your text? And usually that throws them. But half the time, so with the majority text, where is your text? Where are the translations based on your text in history? We can show you tons and tons. Like even the critical text guys do better than the majority text guys here. And where's the definitive English Bible based on that? And when you go through that, it's like this majority text is having absolutely almost zero impact in the world. It's just a few computer nerds who know where it is, and James Snap and a bunch of people, and half the time they differ from each other. It's James Snap, oftentimes he doesn't go with the majority. And so you can see that with the issue of the water baptism in Acts chapter 9, Acts chapter 8, verse 37. Anyway, let's let these guys continue.
All right. So are there places where like the Greek is where the grammar is debate? You were talking about the word doulos, and we can talk about more words because there are a lot more words that are problematic. But are there also grammatical issues are there places where the grammar could be interpreted in a variety of ways? So there must be issues about punctuation, right? Because Greek manuscripts don't have punctuation, and you got to decide how to punctuate something.
So notice Bart, he does look a bit like Bert from Sesame Street. Bart is sort of conflating two concepts here, because she clearly said we follow the NA 28. Okay, so you're going to go with those readings. But then he's like, wouldn't issues like having manuscripts where there was no punctuation in the early church? Well, I mean, that could come into it, but it shouldn't really if you've already decided on your Greek text. If you've gone, okay, we're going to go with this printed Greek text, why would you be worried about something that has no punctuation in the year 300 or 400 or whenever your favorite manuscripts are? That wouldn't matter. And so it might matter if it's mentioned in the apparatus, but then it's just sort of like choices in the apparatus. They've already made these choices for you. So you've got this smorgasbord of choices you can go around. It's not like you can go back in the kitchen and recook these things and say, well, we just want to go with Codex Vaticanus here in this reading. Because the thing is, if I actually went with Sinaiticus and Vaticanus in a lot of readings, people would see how dumb these manuscripts are, because there's a lot of things that get cut out of these manuscripts. Like say, I think it was Vaticanus. I could be wrong, could be Sinaiticus, but I'm pretty sure it's Vaticanus, where Jesus, he didn't die on the cross. He died because a soldier stabbed him. pierced him through with a sword. And then he gave up the ghost, where we understand he gave up the ghost, and then they stabbed him to see if he was dead, and he already was. And so we've got Ashati in the house, and he says, what they're doing is like us Americans coming to your country and rewriting your country's legislation. Yeah. It's like, imagine a bunch of Arabs, from Saudi Arabia. Okay, they came to America and they're telling you how you should be living, and they're trying to interpret your culture back to you, and they can't hardly even speak English, and they're telling you, well, this is what your texts read. And so this is one of the things, like, knowing that these people don't know the languages, that they're just fudging. And see, that this is the problem. In most other fields, you wouldn't get away with this type of illiteracy. In biblical apologetics, all you have to do is sort of know the Greek alphabet and be able to pronounce a word here and there. As long as you can look it up in a dictionary, you know Greek. People are like, I know Greek. James White, I'm a Greek expert. I teach Greek, and I know these people don't know Greek. And so when I listen to these guys and girls talk, sometimes they might know a little bit about a word or be able to pass something on the fly, and it's like, okay, that's impressive. But when it comes down to a full clause or a sentence or a whole verse or a chapter or a book, or understanding or reading through something like that in Greek, like you imagine how much, like even in English, how much do you miss the point if you don't read sometimes a whole chapter? You go, okay, well, say even a small chapter, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the charity, love, depending on which version you're reading, New King James or the King James. And so imagine you just got one verse out of context or one word, and you're trying to explain it. Well, you sort of have to read the whole book, but you should at least be able to read the chapter. And said, this is the thing. I don't think these guys do that. They're not regularly going through to the point of fluency where they can tell that you're in a theme of love here. And so that taints every word in that whole chapter for good or for bad. It's going to affect, the context is going to affect the way things are defined. So it's not just, we're going to list the words here and they're always going to be translated this way. It's like, no, you've got to put it in its correct semantic range. And so I don't think these guys, I don't even think these guys do that in English, let alone do it in other languages, in original Hebrew and Greek. And read through a Hebrew document and get to the point where they're seeing certain patterns in the book of Job, and they're like, wow, I've read through the book of Job like 12 times and I see these types of patterns. Like if you read through, say, like the book of Mark, you can see there's certain themes. There's this immediacy where Jesus, 1 minute he's doing a miracle here, and then it says, and immediately they were doing this, and immediately. So it was just non-stop with Jesus. And there were things happening all the time, where in some of the other gospels, they're sort of, you wouldn't get that immediacy. And so, and when you read through certain gospels, there's a certain theme that is trying to be expressed. I mean, even if you read Matthew, it says his name shall be Emmanuel, which is God with us. And you're like, okay, who in the Bible is calling Jesus Emmanuel? Well, you go to the end of Matthew and it says, lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the world. So last thing in the book, he's saying, I'm with you. God is with us, and that proves also the deity of Christ. It's quite interesting. But so these type of things, are these guys picking this up in Greek? Are these guys picking this up in the Hebrew, in the Aramaic? I doubt it. I highly doubt it. And if I was to get someone in the room with them who can speak fluent Greek, whether no matter which era of Greek, whether it's Erasmian pronunciation of a Byzantine text, or whether it's modern Greek, or whether it's Koine Greek or classical Greek. Any one of these, if you got all of the scholars in Munster and you sat down with them and you started speaking Greek, it would be like you were speaking Swahili to them. They don't know these languages and they struggle with them, and so they have to fudge their way through. But the problem is the bar is so low, it's almost like you don't have to know any of these biblical languages and you'll still get into the academy. You'll still be able to write books on Greek. Like, how does Dan Wallace do that? When he doesn't know the language, how does he write books on the language? And so it's quite amazing. And I've often shared the story of when he was lost in Athens and they couldn't explain to anyone where their motel was until they started writing down letters. And you can imagine it's like, this is how you write that letter, and what's the name of the hotel? It's this one, okay, and what's the word for that? And they're fudging their way through like it's a comedy company. They're not fluent in these languages, and so that's why the academy is in such a deplorable state. It's bad enough when people know these languages and they misrepresent things, but it's disgusting to see that these people don't know their stuff, and yet they come across like they are the gurus. And when you get apologists quoting these guys like they're experts, because Jennifer Knust and Tommy Wasserman, they wrote the book To Cast the First Stone about the woman caught in adultery, and people are just like, well, they're the experts, okay, so this woman here doesn't really believe the gospel at all, doesn't really believe in the Bible, but is a Bible translator somehow. Her and Tommy Wasserman, who doesn't believe that hell is eternal. Now, I noticed in my last video I was saying he doesn't believe that hell has fire. I was getting him mixed up with Billy Graham. He doesn't believe that hell is eternal. So he believes that you go there for a little bit, like a Jehovah's Witness teaches. You just go there for, just like you're cooking pancakes. You don't want to, make them too brown. You just a light little sizzle, and then you're out of the fire, and then you just don't exist. You're annihilated. Wow, that sounds great. But why, why all this, religious stuff and, getting right with God and repenting and being a Christian and having persecution and probably being put to death for your faith? And why bother? Just go out, do whatever you want. This is what I say to Jehovah's Witnesses. Let us eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. If that's it, why bother? It's like, if that was 100% true, it's like, just go and end it. Just go and jump off a cliff and go, yay! It's like splat. Okay, a bit of frying in the pan, maybe for 10 minutes, and it's like, whew, it's over. Bye, guys. It's and they're like, yeah, but the Jehovah's Witnesses are like, yeah, but wouldn't you miss your loved ones? And wouldn't you? It's like, I won't exist. I won't be there. And so, when you know the depravities of sin and how bad this world is, one of the things that sometimes I can get raked over the coals for being a little bit too negative. And so I remember someone was saying that whenever they look at a sunset, they just see the handiwork of God and all this. And they said, what do you think about that, Nick? And I said, look, do you want me to be honest with you, or do you want me to lie to you? So usually they know they're in for a curveball. And I said, look, the thing is, whenever I look at a sunset, I see that God flooded the earth because of man's wickedness. And the earth is nothing like it was in its original creation. Yes, we can still see that things have been created, but this is like a ghetto. and he's just looking at me like, you really think that? And I'm like, I do. Sorry. That's what goes through my mind. I look at things and go, oh yeah, you can see the evidence of the flood in that, Anyway, rabbit trailing. So let's let these guys continue.
And so,
yes.
So, okay. Could you just say something about grammar?
So one that comes to mind, it's kind of a grammar question and kind of a translation question mixed together, is that famous line in 1 Corinthians 7 where Paul says. Hold on, let me look at my notes because I don't want to mess this up.
Okay.
I took notes on this one because I thought you might ask me this question. So here's my 1 Corinthians 7 slate thing. Darn it. See, I should have looked this up. You can edit this part out, right? The boring news stuff here. This part can go away. Where'd it go? I put it in here. You know the one in 1 Corinthians where Paul's like, oh, here we go. There it is. Here it is. 1 Corinthians. Okay. Back into the world. Yeah. 1 Corinthians 7:21, right? Where there's the Greek is incredibly ambiguous. What does Paul mean when he says malon kresai, right? Rather make use of it. Is that what he means? This is the part, were you a slave when called? Don't be concerned about it. Even if you can gain your freedom, make use of your present condition now more than ever. That was the old NRSV.
That's Paul talking to people, people in Corinth who are slaves? People
in Corinth who are slaves.
Okay.
And he's saying to them something, either he's saying, if you're a slave, bummer for you, but make good use of your present condition.
Okay.
Or is he saying something like, Malon Kresai, make use of your opportunity to obtain freedom. What is his nuance here? Yeah. So the old NRSV has make use of your present condition. The book editor came back and said, let's leave this as a minimum translation and recommended that we don't use, that we say something like rather use it, right? If you can gain your freedom, rather use it or something. So that was their book editor's recommendation. And so we sort of talked about that as a board because it was awkward English. And we said, well, maybe we could say this was the board's discussion, but even if it is possible to become free, rather do so with a note, meaning of Greek uncertain. That was a recommendation. Okay. So what we submitted to the National Council of Churches was, were you a slave when called? Do not be concerned about it. But even if it is possible to become free, rather do so. That was somehow that was what we ended up going with. And then what's in the actual translation is, were you a slave when called? Do not be concerned about it. Even if you can gain your freedom, make the most of it. So that was the National Council of Churches decision. I wasn't part of that. But there's still a footnote that says meaning of Greek uncertain. So here we have a kind of ambiguous Greek. I mean, and grammar can't really save it for us, right? But it actually really matters. Is Paul recommending that slaves try to gain their freedom, or is Paul recommending that they don't try to gain their freedom and just, make the best of it and try to show that in fact they're not enslaved anymore, because spiritually they're not enslaved. They're slaves. They're slaves of Christ.
Okay, so I'm just going to jump on Bible Hub and we'll just have a look at these Bible translations, because she's saying that it's pretty much impossible to translate this. So let's have a look at the King James. It just says, let every man abide in the same calling wherein he was called. And so that makes a lot of sense. NIV says each person should remain in the situation they were in when God called them. Okay, so they've added God. And this is one of the things the King James TurretinFan has been pulling the King James over the coals for apparently adding God in for where it has God forbid. Obviously, it's an idiom, and it's to do with the Hebrew idiom as well, and it relates to the Greek. But here we have God mentioned in the text, but theos is not there. New Living Translation does that as well. But we understand this because we are called by God. So they've put that in the text because of the dynamic equivalent. English Standard Version, each one should remain in the condition in which he was called. That is pretty much exactly the same, but instead of calling, they've got condition instead of calling there. Whoops. Calling in the King James. New King James is pretty much identical. So it looks like all these Bibles were able to translate it properly. So I'm just not sure why they would be fussy with that. Even the net, let each man remain in that situation in life in which he was called. I'm pretty sure if you read through all of those versions, there's not that much difference. So I'm sure that when you get down to the nitty gritty, the nuances, that's why I enjoy the King James, because it's so accurate. And usually there's a certain way that they've written things to guide you to it's a bit like when you're doing 10-pin bowling, and the kids, they put up those buffers on the side, and so it doesn't go down the gully. The King James just tends to correct your thinking along the way, and it bounces you in a certain direction, so you're usually hitting the mark. Where these other ones, sometimes, half the time, the verse isn't even there, or it's just so badly translated, you're just throwing it straight into the whole thing is just a gutter. You're just throwing it straight down. There's no pins or anything. You're just like, why am I doing this? But obviously you can translate this properly. So this is the thing. Look, even Bart Ehrman's there going, oh yeah. Jennifer Knust seems to think this is a great example. So Ashati says, I'm interested to know how many non-Muslims are translating the Quran. Yeah, well, there's not that many. Look at Salman Rushdie. He thinks he can say what he wants about the Quran, and he's a wanted man. So you want to be careful with that. King James Bible Sunday School says good evening. So good evening to you. Alec Cox says, poor Bart Ehrman, all that knowledge of Greek and no sense of what it means. Or is it just Sinaiticus and the Vulgate Vaticanus talking? Yeah, this is the problem. They've just got presuppositions that are different to ours, and they just stick with them. And it's just like Jehovah's Witnesses. They pretty much have the same bibliology as Jehovah's Witnesses, by the way. But I think Jehovah's Witnesses wouldn't be as liberal as this. You'd probably have to be a Jehovah's Witness to actually translate the Bible, not just an atheist or LGBTQ. But I remember they used to have people of that persuasion up in the Kingdom Hall up here, and this is back in the 90s. And I used to say, how come you guys have got people of that persuasion in your Kingdom Hall? And these two older guys they couldn't answer it, because you could tell they weren't into it. All the younger crew were like, oh, it's cool, But yeah, so maybe they do go as weird, but it's like they're See, it's the way that I view these people is it's like they are educated in their own cultic material. So say like the Jehovah's Witnesses, they know all about the Watchtower magazine. They know about the Awake magazines. They know about the little help booklet when Christians ask certain questions, the answers book that they carry around with them, and they give you a staple answer. And half the time it's how I would answer. But then they say, and that's wrong because, and they just have like just a verse or something in Ecclesiastes or something really weird, and that we don't have a soul or something. It's like, what? But, the Jehovah's Witnesses, they're given over to thinking like a Jehovah's Witness, and you get with the program. If you're going to be part of their group, that's what you do. These guys, if you want to get with their program, you want to know about Vaticanus and Sinaiticus primarily. And then apart from that, you don't really have to know all about the majority texts and TR things. You just parrot whatever comes down the pike. You just, Erasmus, he didn't know what he was doing. And, Beza, he was an idiot, he was a fool. I'm talking on my Textus Receptus Academy Facebook page with Rick Norris at the moment about Revelation 16:5. And he's just, because I know so much about that, it's really difficult when people come up to me and say things. I can't help but mock, because I know my stuff on it, and he's pretending to know stuff, and he knows almost zero about the verse, but he knows that it's wrong. And it's like, so anyway, yeah, listen to these guys that they just like a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon. They know the Book of Mormon. They know the half the time nowadays they don't even know that the Pearl of Great Price and all those other books that they used to know. Half the time they just know Mormon doctrine, and that's it. And that's what I've found with the Academy, with all the issues of having, different types of text. And we follow the Alexandrian text, but you've got the Caesarean text, and you've got the Western text, and you've got the Byzantine text, and all this sort of stuff. But now you can't even use that language, or else you get scolded. And so you're sort of like, where do I go? How do I learn this stuff? Well, you've just got to get with the latest of the latest scholarship, and then you've got your finger on the pulse. And it's quite interesting that, in the movie 1984, I've explained this a few times, but it sort of fits here, where you have one of the guys who was sort of against Big Brother, or not against Big Brother, he just wanted to live a normal life a little bit, but that's forbidden. And so Big Brother had him on a torture rack, and they were torturing him, and they said, look, in your personal diary, you wrote freedom is the ability to say 2 + 2 = 4. And he's saying, yeah, that's freedom. He's like, but what if we say 2 + 2 = 5? He's like, well, it equals 4. And they've got him on the rack. So every time he gives a wrong answer, or an answer they don't like, they stretch him a little bit further, and he's screaming. And he's like, okay, well, what do you want me to say? He's like, because I could say 2 + 2 = 5, but I'd be lying. I know 2 + 2 = 4. You know 2 + 2 = 4. And then he doesn't know what to do, and they just keep torturing him until eventually he's like, well, what do you want me to say? And he's like, well, that's better, And then he explains to him, he says, look, the thing is 2 + 2 can = 5, but 2 + 2 can = 3, or it can = 4, or it can equal all of them all at the same time. It's what the party says. That's what 2 + 2 equals. Not what you think it says. And then he's like, oh, and then he's back on the rack, and they're torturing him again, and he's holding up, how many do you see now? And he starts to blur out because he's nearly unconscious. And he's blurring out, and he's like, I can see 5. I think I'm seeing 5. And he's like, well, that's good, And that's like with the academy. You go through their anti-Reformation, so they hate the TR. Westcott and Hort made it clear, the villainous TR, they dislike that. You've had people like Whetstone, Griesbach, Ruckman, they've all come along with all different methodologies, but all anti-TR, anti-King James, anti-TR. And then you've got, the Westcott and Hort, or you had Tischendorf as well with his own methodologies. And usually all these guys have their own different things that they want to squeeze or put into the text. It was only until Ruckman, he basically created his text that was different from a TR edition. So they, lots of people after that went, well, we've gone over an edge here. Let's just keep this rolling. And so then you had Tischendorf, and then you have Weiss, and then you have Weymouth, and then you got all these texts coming out, Westcott and Hort, and then you got the NA 28 edition. So you have 27 editions before that, the UBS editions, and so you got all these great texts coming out, and all different methodologies. Because Westcott and Hort, when they created their methodology, they were saying that the Byzantine text is not ancient, but when they found a bunch of papyri with a whole bunch of Byzantine readings in it, they were like, actually, it is ancient, and so that disproved Westcott and Hort their position completely. It vindicated people like Dean John William Burgon, who was saying that, this is the Byzantine text is ancient. But so that methodology changed. But no, they've gotten rid of the TR now, so that's the most important thing. And then, since then the methodology's changed. They've gone, instead of going with all the work of Nessel, they've actually gone back to Westcott and Hort. This is what Carlo Martini, a Jesuit priest, Metzger, Black, Kurt Ayland, these guys, they went back to the Westcott and Hort text, and they amended their text accordingly after using that as a base. So they actually went back to that. And so they've got a different methodology. And if you read through Metzger's text, that sort of became the standard text for the next 20, 30 years. And people are trying to understand why they've made certain decisions. They had, I'm pretty sure it was an ABCD type of referencing system, where it was A was that should be the text. B was there's some doubt, but it still should be in there. C was no, it's doubtful, it probably shouldn't be in there. And D was definitely, absolutely not in there. And so I'm pretty sure that's how it worked. I had described it as an A, B, C, D, E text because I know someone else who's doing a similar thing with the TR, and they're rating things like that. But I think they actually have an E, so I think I got confused with that. But anyway, it's confusing. And so this is just the way that they've got their methodologies. And then, Bart Ehrman's come along and, he's learned a bunch of stuff and parroting, the whole thing about, these different Christianities. Different Christians had different texts and different Bibles. And so you've got all these different Christianities around the place. And so then you have the whole concept of the Orthodox corruption of Scripture, where the people who are Orthodox, they're the ones who were the problem. They were trying to squeeze Jesus and the Trinity and all sorts of things into the text. Now, we know that in some places this did happen, but not in it. It's almost like a default thing. Well, it's just the Orthodox, any TR reading. It's a corruption. The Orthodox wanted that in there, So that just becomes their mantra. And oftentimes, those things where the shortest reading's the best, the hardest reading's the best. But how far do you take that? When it's the hardest reading, is it the most stupidest reading's the best? Because some of these readings are stupid. Sometimes it has the wrong number, the wrong genealogy, the wrong history, the wrong Jesus goes to the wrong town. And clearly it violates all the other gospels and everything. It's like, he's in the wrong town, guys. Are you really going to go with that reading just because Vaticanus and Sinaiticus have it? Sure enough, they do. And you're like, so then you've got the CBGM come on the scene. And so that's gotten rid of a lot of these classifications. And so the CBGM is the coherence-based genealogical method. So they're using a lot of computer technology to find out the genealogy of manuscripts and where certain errors crept into the text, or where correct readings have their ancestry and all this sort of stuff. And so it's fascinating, but it's sort of like someone like James White, who seems to be one of those guys who keeps his finger on the pulse with all the critical text material. He is saying, forget everything you've learned before and learn this. Re-educate yourself. This is what you need to know. And so it's quite amazing when you go through what's being said lately. People, it's sort of like everything you've known before, just throw it all out. And they try to make out us TR people are inconsistent. We're probably the only ones who are consistent, where if you were to go back 200 years and say, the Textus Receptus King James Bible, we would say, okay, there's the words of God. If you to go back 400 years, there's the words of God. Now, we can't go really back to before printing and produce a printed thing, but we can go back to manuscripts and we can show you where things have, where we get readings from. Now, obviously, we don't think that all of those manuscripts survived, especially if someone's collated a whole bunch of manuscripts and they've got them in one place. The chances of those getting, stolen, destroyed, burnt. I mean, there are plenty of people, even on both sides of, Christianity, burning things. Like even Henry VIII, I reckon it was one of the worst burnings of manuscripts ever in history was when Henry VIII was persecuting the Catholics, because oftentimes they would have a whole bunch of manuscripts on their shelves, whether they agreed with them or not. They're old, they're ancient, they're there, and oftentimes churches were burnt, and 300 people were burnt during that time as well. And so then you had his daughter, Bloody Mary, and similar things. She's burning the Protestants this time. And so there's a whole bunch of history where manuscripts are just turning to ash and smoke. And like when people talk about the King James Bible and the history of the King James Bible, a lot of people don't like the fact that the vast majority of the history of the King James Bible went up in smoke in a fire in 1666 when 437 acres of London burnt. And they actually set up like a museum type thing for the King James Bible, and that was part of that. They compiled everything. It's like, let's get John Boyce's notes, and let's get Andrew Downes's little Bible here, and we've got this note, and then it's just it's all in one place and it all goes up in smoke, where if it was actually, spread out. And that's how we can sort of still piece together a few things, because there was some stuff still spread out there. But it's like sometimes, piling things up, it's like you're almost asking for them to be destroyed, especially around, given the amount of time. I mean, you think of the last 100 years, there was 1 million biblical manuscripts destroyed just in World War II alone. And so that's a lot. That's a lot of manuscripts destroyed. And so you think World War One, you think before that, the wars that they've had with England and France and Germany, and it's surprising that there's anything left, the horrible things that have happened. So we've got a ton of comments here, so I'm just going to start going through them. God forbid is an idiom, and the fact that it is used is a non-event. The King James wasn't written by cultists like Westcott and Hort. Yeah, and God forbid is, I can't understand why TurretinFan is making a fuss about that. It's like even Dan Wallace is on my side. When I went through the debate, I actually read directly from Dan Wallace where he was agreeing with me, and it's like, really, are you going to go against your own main guru? The King James wasn't written by a cult, and Westcott and Hort. I know a lot of people have said that they're involved with the occult, with the ghostly guild and things like that. And I actually don't know that much about it. But what I do know is Westcott and Hort, they had Unitarians work on their Bible. And so they had George Van Smith, who was a Unitarian. And a lot of people don't like to talk about this because he wrote a book about the doctrinal differences between the TR Bible and the Revised version. And so the King James version and the Revised version are obviously different because they have a different underlying Greek text. And Unitarians love that. That's why I call it the Unitarian text, because the Bible societies at the time had been taken over by the Unitarians. They had, or the Trinitarians, a lot of them had left and formulated the Trinitarian Bible Society in 1831 because there was too many Unitarians in the original Bible Society. So 50 years later, obviously, they've still got a lot of influence there. Westcott and Hort have Unitarians working with them. There's a lot of Unitarians. And so that was before Jehovah's Witnesses became quite popular. A lot of Unitarians just simply became Jehovah's Witnesses. That was what Unitarianism became, and Christadelphianism and some other isms. Ishati, I'm also interested to know how many Muslims will accept non-Muslims translating the Quran. Well, see, that's the thing. Why are Christians accepting the trash that's coming from these people? And why are apologists, there are people going around America, Canada, Australia, England, other countries, South Africa, and saying, hey, we need to listen to the Academy. Hey, they've got the Bible. Hey, you people who want the Reformation text, you're like your hillbilly Hicks who... with a bit of straw in your mouth, playing the banjo on your porch, you're a literate dimwit, and you need to get with the program. You need to get with the atheists, and they're the ones with the good oil. They know where the words of God are. You fundamentalist Christians, you guys are just off the wall, and you need to repent, and you become a little bit more woke and a little bit more progressive. But what's amazing is, when I was in Pakistan, I was looking at the Interfaith Bible written by Muslims and Christians. And so they don't like to talk about that. The Bible Society is sponsoring that. Who are the Bible? Just look up who the Bible Societies are and what they do. And it's like, these guys are just full on. No Bart Ehrman fan here. The problem lays with his version versus what he wants, the controversy. Yeah, so even though he's talking with Jennifer Knust, and they know each other really well. I know in this interview it's sort of like, oh, we've got Jennifer Knust, and don't let her fool you. She's a smart girl and all this sort of stuff. And these people know each other very well, and they attend the same meetings. They would talk and chat, and so. But in this interview, it's made out that she's sort of like orthodox, and Bart Ehrman obviously he's not. So. But they're really both pretty much on the same page. And even Jennifer Knust is probably like in what she said about the Bible, probably way more anti-Bible than Bart Ehrman. Like she says the Bible is just a complete myth. It's not written by God at all. and it's written by men. It supports the patriarchy. It never even mentions homosexuality. So why bring it up, sort of thing? And so she's you might hear Bart Ehrman saying a few things here and there that are weird and all the rest of it, and it's like, okay, but it's like she's full on. And so but she's the main editor for this Bible version. So the Quran is in English, however, it's full of contradictory sayings, even in native tongue. The sun sets in mud. Yeah, and so even the name Isa, or Jesus, they say it's Jesus, but it's actually shortened form of Isaac, which is the rejected son. And so it's quite interesting. Have to make more Tischendorf parchments. Got to go. I'm sure you can find some in a bin somewhere. And it's amazing. You bring up, it was found in a bin. Tischendorf said that. That was his own words. James White's like, they weren't found in a bin, So he said that. We're not saying that. We're just saying what he said. It's quite amazing. Isheti says, I understand that Alex Cox, the point I'm making is the fact that Christians are infidels becoming authority figures and in positions of influence in the church. Yeah, having a bit of a chat between them. Step into 1984, 2 + 2 = 5, because the state says so. Academia is now the same. Yeah, and you see this with politics. It's like politics is so lame nowadays, and I just can't even follow it half the time. I just follow it for the comic relief, and it's like Frank Zappa once said. He said politics is just the entertainment wing for the military-industrial complex. And so all the people who make the weapons and they really control everything, and they're threatening countries with annihilation if they don't obey them or buy their products or whatever. They just have this political thing. It's like the cha-cha girls. The whole political system in America has just become like the cha-cha girls, that to keep people entertained for the military-industrial complex. I thought that was a great saying, even though I wouldn't agree with everything Frank Zappa does or says. Alec Cox, unfortunately, the Vatican is known to have made fake historical documents. They said they were sorry, but haven't changed much. I like how you said that. They said they're sorry, but they haven't changed much. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I just don't trust some of these documents until they're scientifically tested. They should be openly critiqued, tested scientifically. All the ink should be tested. They should use the latest methodology, and they should do it publicly. Step in line, or you won't keep your job. That's about it. If you want to be part of the Jehovah's Witness team and do a Watchtower article every now and then, you've got to be Jehovah. And so these people, they're like, well, we want to be in the academy. We've got to do what they want. And the standards are so low, you can sort of do anything. You just got to agree with them. If you just agree with them, then you're fine. Ehrman is a Metzger student. Yes, he is Metzger's final student. So Haynick says the water's been muddied on purpose. Yes, I would agree with that. There is definitely an anti-Reformation movement, and the thing is too, a lot of people who are being duped aren't even actually Christians. They're fake Christians, so there's fake churches, fake Christians, fake pastors. There's so many of them that it's like, I run into them all the time, and sometimes you just say one little bit of truth and they lose their mind and they manifest at you and they hate you forever. I say infidels, in what church? Islam or being false teachers? Okay, you're talking to Isai. I thought you were saying the name Isa. So you're talking to Isheti. Yeah, I understand that There are deceivers who are not vetted. Westcott and Hort were financed by the Vatican. In fact, I'd like to know that. I don't think that that's true. But if you have any information that I don't, I would say that they were financed by the Church of England. So the Church of England, they were commissioned to, or they commissioned Ellicott to do a new Bible. And so Westcott and Hort were involved heavily with that. And they snuck in this never seen before Greek text, Frankenstein monster blasphemy into the English realm. And so we've been plagued with that horrible monster ever since. Shati says, I meant to say Christians allowing infidels become positions of influence and authority in the church. Yeah. And so that's why I just don't recognize these people as Christians. And the thing is, with someone like Mark Ward or whatever, these people, half the time they're like, oh, our brother this and our brother that, unless they come out like Bart Ehrman and say, I'm an agnostic or I'm an atheist. Well, how can you tell? What if they're just lying to you? Well, you can know them by their fruit. And that's the thing. People don't want to judge other people because they know that they'll be judged. And that's one of the things, the parable of the sower. Some people, when judgment comes, persecution comes against them, they lose it. And they're like, oh, I don't like being persecuted. And they shrivel up and they fall away. And so, but the churches are filled with these people who have fallen away. And so they have denied Jesus. They've denied the faith. They're doing it. They mightn't be coming out and saying, hey, I don't believe in Jesus anymore because, hey, their wife goes to that church. Hey, the Sunday school is good for their kids and all this sort of stuff. But I meet them all the time where people want to get their kids into Sunday school, but they want to go out and party and rock and roll on a Friday night and all the rest of it. But they're not really interested in Christianity at all. But they know there's good morals there, or for whatever reason, nostalgic reasons, they're sending their kids to Sunday school, or they are involved in the church and they just keep turning up there, and all sorts of weird things like Hillsong. They can start raping the little kids, and you just keep going there because that's what we do. We've been going to this church for 40 years. And so and for whatever reason, they go to these places and remain involved with these heretical teachers. And the Bible clearly says separate from people, especially if it's leaders. If the main leaders are off the wall, it's like just head for the door, But a lot of people, they got pride as well, religious pride, and they don't want to admit that they could be wrong. I agree. The falling away is happening and many are being deceived. It's a fact. Yes, many are being deceived. I'll get the information for you. Thanks, Alec Cox. Let's get back to this video.
So that means they're not enslaved to human masters.
But
from Paul's
it sounds like you're saying that the final decision is made by people who are not experts in Greek or in translation.
Well, the people in the National Council of Churches who made that decision do read Greek. So the National Council of Churches representative on our committee was Abraham Smith, who's a fantastic scholar, as you know, who teaches at Perkins. And so presumably he was part of that discussion. And I don't know, somewhere there's notes about why that decision was made. But it's not outside of what the board had discussed, right? Like what their decision
in translation.
So listen to this. This is Bart Ehrman. I'll just go back a little bit. He's basically saying that you guys don't really know the Greek. You're making these decisions because she's just basically said it's almost impossible to translate this Greek word. And I just showed you, every Bible sort of translates it pretty much the same way. They just use different methodologies. And then Bart Ehrman's like, well, so you're saying that you can't translate these things, and you guys, he knows they're not experts in Greek. So he's sort of quizzing them like, well, how are you coming to these conclusions? And you can tell she's a bit flummoxed by this. She sort of cornered herself by saying that she can't really work it out. There's no way to work it out. But then it's like she just palms it off and says, oh, this other guy's an expert in Greek, and so we follow him. Listen to this.
Spiritually, they're not enslaved. They're slaves. They're slaves of Christ. So that means they're not enslaved to human masters.
But
from Paul's
it sounds like you're saying that the final decision is made by people who are not experts in Greek or in translation.
See that? So this is why sometimes it's interesting listening to Bart Ehrman, because he's part of the academy, but he pulls his own over the coals. And she's like, oh, because she doesn't know Greek. But all these people don't know Greek. They're not experts in Greek, but they're doing a Bible translation from the Greek into English. And so he's like, well, it sounds like a lot of these decisions are being made by people who don't know Greek. And so that would be a normal question that I would bring up. So, do you guys know Greek? Can you guys translate that from Greek into English? And oftentimes it's no. So let's have a look at what she says.
Well, the people in the National Council of Churches who made that decision do read Greek. So
the people who made that decision do read Greek.
The National Council of Churches representative on our committee was Abraham Smith, who's a fantastic scholar, as you know, who's teaching.
I'm going to look this guy up. Abraham Smith. Abraham Smith. Bible Greek. Abraham Smith Perkins. Okay, PDF. Perkins, Dallas, Texas. Okay. He's been around for a while. Interdenominational Theological Center, Methodist. Okay, so he's teaching Greek. Okay, so he's got a lot of the right ticks, the right resume. I wonder if he's done any work on gender. No, nothing like Knust. I wonder what he says about King James. Oops. King James Bible and the figuring of African American bodies. King James Bible. That's different. Anyway, there's not much to see there, so let's just continue.
Which is at Perkins. And so presumably he was part of that discussion. And I don't know, somewhere there's notes about why that decision was made. But it's not outside of what the board had discussed, right? Like what their decision, make the most of it, is not that different from.
Yeah, but it doesn't sound like it's being decided on academic grounds. In other words, it's not like people who are really wrestling with what an ancient language means. It's people who are concerned that the translation not be used in a bad way or understood in a bad way, and so it sounds like there are issues outside of linguistic scholarship that are determining how the translation gets done. Is that fair to say?
That's true.
And so Bart Ehrman just sort of said, so basically it's these people aren't experts in Greek, and at the end of the day, the real, when the rubber meets the road and it's translated into English, they're relying on people like you who don't know Greek and who are just sort of trying to squeeze in a cultural buffer so that people don't get offended by issues of slavery and gender and other things, race. Let's not offend anyone, and so let's word the Bible this way instead of wording it exactly what it says. Yeah, interesting. So Bart Ehrman, great question, and I guess when I've listened through this initially, I didn't realize that he was actually pulling her over the coals a little bit with these questions.
Which is why people should read the preface to their translations, right? Because I don't
understand what it means.
But I'm not sure that people don't realize, or our students probably don't realize that all of these translations. I don't know of a translation, maybe an individual translation, but every translation has some kind of confessional Christian involvement in it, to my knowledge of the New Testament. So
every translation has some type of confessional Christian involvement. So shouldn't it be like, look, we hate to say this, guys, but we know that 99% of the Bible translations are born-again Christians, but apparently there was one guy who was a little bit iffy, and no, it's like everyone's iffy, and apparently that sometimes they actually have some of these weirdo conservatives, and we're not even talking about King James TR people or anything like that. We're just talking about people who are, pastors, or they're leading congregations, or they've still got faith. Apparently they're still involved. So Alec Cox says Westcott and Hort used the wrong Alexandrian manuscripts. Westcott and Hort were undercover Catholics trying to convince Protestants to use the corrupted Alexandrian manuscripts that the Catholic Church uses. Yeah, so I don't really know that. I would say that they had high Anglican type of leanings to Puseyism. They were Puseyites. Or actually, Dean John William Burgon was a Puseyite. But these guys, yeah, maybe I'm just getting them mixed up. But they had a high Anglican view of some things, which can be akin to Catholicism. But I wouldn't say they're undercover Catholics. Some people can just be evil all on their own without being underneath an umbrella. These people, they were involved with Unitarians, and so the Roman Catholic Church would have definitely frowned upon that. They probably wouldn't have allowed Unitarians to do Mass or the Eucharist, but the Church of England allowed these Unitarians to do communion. So yeah, I would say that they're just heretical. Sometimes putting people underneath a certain umbrella term, usually pride, ego, influence, money, power, they can be the umbrella terms that some people are under. Some people have been, Catholics, Jesuits, against the Word of God. Carlo Martini, is a good example. The Bible Societies today, absolutely. But I'm just not absolutely sure. If I can follow the rabbit trail, follow the crumbs of information to the Vatican, then I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm convinced. But until then, a lot of people make these claims, and I know a lot of books say this, but I'm just like not really 100% convinced. Article on Westcott and Hort translation molding the Alexandrian text with the Vaticanus Vulgate. Okay, so Vaticanus and the Vulgate are quite separate, quite distinct. So the Vulgate is actually a lot more like the Textus Receptus than Vaticanus is. So Vaticanus was looked at by Erasmus and completely rejected. The Reformation era, people rejected it. John Mill, 1707, rejected it. And so the Vulgate is more like a TR edition. So the Clementine Vulgate is closer to the TR, way closer than, say, the amalgamation of Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, the Alexandrian texts together that forms the critical text. And so let's just let these guys continue.
Oh, that's going to make a difference in terms of how the translation takes place.
You mentioned the New International Version earlier, and it's the most popular English translation. It has been for many, many years. Yeah. And it reads very well. It reads well. It's a good translation that way. But the committee members, if I understand correctly, I think I do understand correctly, were all evangelical Christians and had to have an evangelical commitment to the inspiration of the Bible. Right. And there are places where they simply translate away contradictions. I mean, there are contradictions that they just, the way they translate it, it's no longer.
So she's just like, yep. So she thinks the Bible is not inspired by God and full of contradictions, just like Bart Ehrman does. And so the only reason she got a bit miffed was because he's just basically saying, you guys don't really know the Greek language, do you? And she's like, oh, no, we do, sort of, and so it was just actually a bit of a dig at her scholarly credentials. But yeah, these guys are pretty much in agreement.
We're a contradiction. And so you can't.
And notice Bart Ehrman's just saying the NIV is filled with contradictions. And so.
Even if you're reading that, you can't even tell that there's a problem So like I'll have students in class and I'll be pointing out, this verse, that verse, the difference in this book, and they'll say, I don't see that. Look, I said, what translation? I'm using the NIV. It's a great translation in this way, but I guess it's really not different. You're saying it's not different. We all have institutional boundaries, or translators have institutional boundaries, and that affects things. Unlike say a translation of Homer, where where
exactly, and a translation of something like Homer has to be attentive not only to sort of ease of reading and how we could teach that text or whatever, but to a bunch of scholars who are going to yell at you if you don't get your.
Well, that's right. It's still institutional. That's right.
So, but with the New Testament, it's not only a bunch of scholars who are going to yell, and I'm sure, or not yell, maybe be annoyed or critical or whatever. And I'm sure there will be criticism of this translation, and I welcome that. I mean, I think that's appropriate actually, because like I said, there's things that as a scholar I probably wouldn't have chosen that this translation or that translation. But that's appropriate, and there will also be critics on the confessional Christian side. There will be other Christians who don't like this or that, and it's hard to bring all these interests together into a single translation. I mean, it's impossible, really.
So it was interesting when I was listening to D.A. Waite like 20 years ago. He said that when he was learning Greek, he was so used to biblical things being close to the original, that when he started going through other Greek and Latin, because he also majored in Latin, other Greek and Latin texts, like, so we're looking at Homer, they're talking about Homer here. He said it was very difficult because they weren't translated as accurately. Now, how the tables have turned, that was in 1948 when he was in school. It was probably, between the 40s and mid-50s where he was doing a lot of his schooling. And so here you have 70 years later, these guys are saying, the Bible is like that. It's you can't really tell how it's being translated. It's so all wishy-washy. But something like Homer it's got to be word for word. Where back then they were saying that the Bible was really strict, and when they started going through some of the ancient Greek, the classical type of Greek, that it was very difficult because it wasn't as word for word as Scripture was, and they were used to that because that's what they'd cut their teeth on. And so it's amazing how the tables are turned. So Alec Cox says, how well are you versed in the order of the Jesuits? Ignatius Loyola started because of his work during the Spanish Inquisition. Jesuits like Cardinal Dolan, who I actually know. Interesting convo. So yeah, I know about the Jesuits. My uncle was a Jesuit, and so the whole concept of the Jesuits is basically the Counter-Reformation. Ignatius Loyola was absolutely a psychopath. These are murderous psychopaths, and the history of the Jesuits is just a history of bloodshed and misinformation, and so I understand that there can be groups like the Jesuits behind things, but usually unless that is something that's seen, I don't just default to that type of position and go, well, there's some sort of Jesuit conspiracy behind it. Now if you have like say the modern Bibles with Bruce Metzger, meeting up with the Pope, meeting with the main leaders of the Greek Orthodox Church and saying in 1972 we all have the same Bible now, and people like Eugene Nida, people like Carlo Martini, who was himself a Jesuit, behind a lot of this type of thing. Carlo Martini being a Jesuit and working on the text, he obviously had influence, and so this obviously is an open door for the Jesuits, and that's where I can go, Jesuit influence. And that's what I say to James White and a whole bunch of other apologists. I say, well, why don't you talk about him? Because he just ruins their narrative of they're all good Christians and they all love the Trinity and all this sort of stuff. And so the Jesuits are just sort of like an anti. So I would say that yes, a lot of material has come from them, but some of it's been come from different places. It's like, say, Gnosticism. You wouldn't just say that that's Catholic, or I know like the Chick Tract type of thing, where it's like even Islam is a Catholic thing, and it's all started from the Catholics and the Black Pope, and sort of like it's a bit too oversimplified, because there are some things that are just evil in and of by themselves, like Mormonism. It's just this bizarre aberration. It's mostly to do with Masonism, so there are different factions. And so this is the thing, like I can agree with many people about, there's certain factions in the world, people who have control of a lot of money or a lot of resources, or I'll have a lot of power, but then it's sort of like, okay, who's the head of what's evil? Is it the Queen, or she's passed away recently, so is it Prince or King Charles, or is it the Rosicrucians, or is it the Club of Rome, or is it the CIA, or is it the the Bilderberger Group, or is it and there's 50 of these different groups that all apparently have this sort of power. But at the end of the day, I'm just, when it comes to these type of things, I just want what's provable. And if there's a Jesuit involved, there were Catholics involved with the Bible societies in the early days. But see, sometimes when you go to certain countries, that's all you can do. If you were to go to Japan, around that era, there was hardly any Protestant Christians. There were just Catholics. So who are you going to learn biblical concepts from, other than a Roman Catholic? You know what I mean? And so sometimes there can be that type of problem. I'm not saying that you should just compromise and all the rest of it, but the Bible societies, they were doing sort of joint efforts with some Catholics, but then the Trinitarian Bible Society started. And so Asheti says, Nick, the Jesuits are like the CIA of the Vatican. I think that's the best way to describe them. Yeah, and even the CIA, when they were doing their thing under, what were they originally called? The OSS. And so even under the OSS, they were basically praising the Vatican, because they'd been, well, they claim that they've been doing their work for 2,000 years, and CIA comes on the scene. They've only been doing it for 50 years, sort of thing. But the Vatican spy network is quite large. When you look at the power that they had, even after World War II, the amount of Nazis that were smuggled through the Vatican, they were high-ranking SS leaders, Nazis, just given a robe and told that they had a new identity as a priest, and they went to Argentina, Australia, and America a lot of the time. And this is proven. This is just fact. It's not even like conspiracy, weird sort of stuff. This is just like you watch documentaries on this. I've got books like explaining this, like the Unholy Trinity, the Vatican, the Nazis, and the Swiss banks. And so Mark Aarons and John Loftus. Mark Aarons is an Australian guy, so he sort of worked for the ABC, which is a bit like the BBC. And these guys wrote a book called Rat Lines, and how they smuggled a lot of these Nazis through the Vatican. And so this goes in depth into all that. We've got another interesting book called The Secret War Against the Jews, by the same two guys. And so it's a very interesting book. This is from the 1990s. I've had this since the 90s. It goes into, they interview 500 spies. So we're talking about guys from KGB, old school MI5, MI6, CIA operatives. They're interesting books. So Alec Cox says, I was ignorant of the Jesuit order until I saw for myself the universities like Notre Dame and Georgetown, and the large influence that has been afforded to them is immense. It hasn't changed. Again, here in Australia, if you want a good education, you send your kids to a Catholic school. Usually, I mean, there are a few public schools where your kids can thrive and the rest of it. And there are a few other, like Anglican schools and stuff like that. But basically, as a default, if you want your child to be educated and you want your child to come out the other side with a good scorecard, you will send them to a Catholic church. And so they're focused on education in the last 50 years, I guess, probably the last 100 years. Helg says these two are kindred spirits, the one identifying as an agnostic and the other identifying as a Christian. And it's interesting that atheists, agnostics, and liberals are so interested in the Bible. Yeah, and so that's really interesting. But even Jennifer Knust doesn't identify as a Christian. She doesn't believe that God wrote the Bible. That God, she believes that the Bible is a myth. It's a complete myth. And she's one of the main editors for the New Revised Standard Version. And so she's way worse than Bart Ehrman. So this is the thing. It's like Bart Ehrman seems like he's got her over the coals. But it's quite interesting. So Alec Cox said he lived in Australia. Oh, it's great. Yeah, it was Australia Day just yesterday. So everyone's got their flags out and their Southern Cross tattoos on their face.
So can you let's go back to kind of on a more kind of technical level about translating Greek into English. It's got to be somewhat different from translating, French or Russian, because those are living languages, and we have trillions of books and articles and things written in these languages.
Yes.
But so with Greek, can you tell us just on the very basic level, Greek is still a spoken language, but the spoken language today, it just ain't like it was 2,000 years ago.
Sure.
And so how do you even know what words meant 2,000 years ago? Talking about the very basic, like, how do you know what a word means?
And so he's actually asking questions like I would ask. But at the end of the day, Greek, the morphology of Greek, hasn't really changed for the last 2,000 years. It's changed about as much as, say, like early modern English that the King James Version has from today's English. We can still understand it. People who grab a Koine Greek Bible, usually, like I gave a friend of mine the Textus Receptus. And so I had a bunch of these when I ran a Christian bookshop. And so when pastors would come through, I'd give him a copy. And he was a Greek guy. And I gave one to his brother too. He was Greek as well. And they're all from Melbourne. And he said, well, I can read this because he said, I know about grade 4 level Koine just simply by being a Greek. So straight away, he's at like a grade 4 level. So if you're in grade 4, you could probably read a novel. You could read pretty well. You can do maths, and so he could read through this, and he's already advanced it to a grade 4 level just by knowing modern Greek. And so that's the thing. People seem to make out that Greek is a dead language. It's like Latin, or it's it's one of these Ugaritic type of languages. It's dead. Now, I know there is a whole field of study into those types of languages, but Greek's not one of them. The Greeks have been speaking Greek for the last 2,000 years. They've been commentating on Greek for the last 2,000 years. They've been copying Greek manuscripts. They know what these words mean. And so someone like Georgios Babiniotis, who's written 6 dictionaries and 200 books on the Greek language, many of these dealing with Greek etymology, he could tell you. And so having people like that on your translation committee, that would be invaluable, because they would be able to explain to you what these words mean, and also explain historically how these words are being translated. And so it's not just looking at the Greek in isolation. The Greek was translated frequently, and so you can look at how things were translated. You can look at how things were brought across, and oftentimes you're only left with like 2 or 3 choices. And most of the time this has been ironed out by experts in the languages, by the King James translators. And so if you go with them, you are guaranteed that you'll get 100% correct. exactly what they're saying. So just look up that word in the Oxford English Dictionary or the Webster's, just, understand what that word means in English properly of that era. And usually you've got a good understanding of the definition of that Greek term as well at the same time. So Helg says, even James Snap said the new revised standard version has been tampered with. Yeah, he wasn't into it.
Well, I think you have to just read a lot of Greek, and not only New Testament, right? You have to read all the Greek that you can get your hands on, from Homer all the way to, the 13th century, if you can. We have something called the Thesaurus Linguae Graeca, which is a giant digital compendium of all Greek literature from its earliest, extant moment up until, I think they're in the 16th century now. So if we could read all of that Greek, then we would have a chance. No, I think that the more
most people would say you just look it up in a dictionary, right? But how do the people make the dictionary know what the words mean?
Well, they read a lot of Greek. Exactly.
But you can't read the Greek if you don't know what the words mean. So what? Right. So how's it work?
Well, they're also, if they're English speakers, for example.
You see how Bart Ehrman sort of he's faced with this dilemma where he doesn't know Greek either. So he's like, how can you make these dictionaries if you don't know what the word means, But people who are fluent in Greek, they know what these words mean. It's not like they're just left there scratching their head. They know the context of these words. They know where these words appear in other Greek literature. It's not just a definition you looked up in a dictionary. That many times these words are still used today, but they might have a different meaning. But they know that older meanings of the word meant a certain thing. And so the Bible has actually kept the Greek language stable. And so one of the most interesting conversations you'll have about linguistics is talking with Greek-speaking, fluent Greek-speaking people. And you ask them, what does this word mean? What does that word mean? And they'll give you the rundown of exactly what it means half the time. And they're usually just speaking modern Greek. And so Greeks are very interesting people. A lot of them are very fascinated by their language. And if they know English fluently as well, they understand the carryover and how a lot of English words are related to Greek words, especially in the field of medicine and science and the arts.
Then they're also being trained by other English speakers what these words mean. So I think that the way we all start, at least I'll speak for myself, I started learning Greek was I had my Greek professor teaching me how to translate certain words. I think we all learned, at least what I did, I learned luo, to loose is the base way of interpreting or sort of learning all of the verbal forms. And so nobody told me that, to loose could also mean to set free or whatever. And I had to learn that over time through encountering the word in context. So initially you learn some kind of, obvious meaning, and then you have to learn, you see the word happening, and then you're like, oh, wait a minute, that's not quite what this means, or it means it, but it means it with a different nuance. So like to loose might mean to set free if it's in the right context.
Yeah. Okay. So the idea is then you get a basic meaning, and but then so if you get the word hodos, which means like a way, a road or a path, and then you're reading it, you realize when you read it enough, it doesn't mean dandelion, or it doesn't mean ship. It means because it doesn't make sense, and so you see what it. So that makes sense of this context. But eventually you'll come to a context and say, wait, that doesn't really sound that the road or path doesn't really work here, but it means something kind of really. And so that's how they come up, by reading everything in context, I guess. So
exactly.
What happens with words?
What he's stating there is quite simple, but for two of the world leading scholars in academia, working on Bible translation, working in the academy, it's almost like we've degraded this conversation down to first year Greek, and talking about luo and loose and then Bart Ehrman's just like, I guess you just keep going through and you read it in context. That's how you come up with the definition. It's like, it's pretty basic sort of stuff.
some of which you get in the New Testament for which there is no other usage. In other words,
yes.
a word is made. So the technical term, for those of you who are into technical terms, those are called hapax legomena.
Isn't that a great thing to call? That's a great term in English. Like hapax legomena is like such an awesome word. Everyone should learn that word.
They should. And I tell my students, you need to learn words like this so your parents will be able to justify their tuition costs. Learn hapax legomena. Okay, so you come across, and a singular for that is a hapax legomenon. And so when you come across a hapax legomena in anywhere, but in the New Testament there are a few. I mean, how do you know how to translate it if there's no context, right? Somebody's told you what it means, but maybe they're wrong. How do they know? So how do you know?
Well, you just read all the debates and then you make a decision. The example that sticks in my mind, which is it is a hapax legomena because it's a hapax legomenon that ends up being a hapax legomena, is the word arsenikotoi, which means is some kind of.
So she's waited the whole interview to bring this word up because this is her forte, arsenikoite. So this is a word that they say Paul actually made up, sort of out of thin air. And this means men laying with other men. And so let's have a look. So I'm pretty sure it's in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 or chapter 5. She might even say it, might save me searching.
Kind of hybrid of the word man beds, right? So it's like the word man, arsen, plus beds. The word for bed. Man and beds mushed together into a word.
Where does this first occur?
It first occurs in 1 Corinthians, Paul. It first occurs in a writing of Paul. That's the first known.
So you notice these guys aren't like in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 verse, because I just don't think that they read the Bible like you and I would, and go through and say, it's in John 3:3, you must be born again, and you're out witnessing and preaching and trying to get things correct and accurate. It's just sort of, it's over there somewhere. Okay, so just looking up. Okay. 1 Corinthians 6, 9 to 10. I should have known that because this is part of what Stephen Anderson talks about as well. And so I've had a bit of a bee in my bonnet with his translation of it. Or him saying basically homosexuals can't ever be saved. It's like, it's very clear here what these people are. So, and it says, these people will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. Okay. But it says such were some of you, or such were some of us, so they can be born again, they can be saved. But Stephen Anderson, he makes this whole thing about reprobates, which I think he actually got from Calvinist concepts. But the whole thing about reprobate is just dealing with metals. And so what they would do is they would heat silver or heat gold, and the dross that came up from it, that was reprobate, and they would get rid of that. And so anything that was rubbish, it's reprobate. Paul said that he could become a reprobate. And so obviously he's saying that he could lose it, and which is quite an interesting thing. But when I brought that up with Stephen Anderson, he didn't really want to talk about that. Okay, so verse 10, covetous swindlers. Okay, so I'm going to have to go to actually the King James because I'm looking at an interlinear and it's all over the place. 6. Okay, so it says nor effeminate, nor abusers of themselves with mankind. Okay. The issue is when it has nor abusers of themselves with mankind, it's actually a cross-reference. Leviticus 18:20. Is it Leviticus 18:20? This is the problem. I'm just going through Bible Hub, and the verses on the side here aren't really like usually you would think that they would go to the ones that are relative to what's being talked about, but they're sort of just going all over the place. Talking about adultery, it's not really talking about that, but clearly there is a reference. I'm pretty sure it's in Leviticus, but it does talk about where's the King James? It does talk about the abusers of themselves with mankind. So let's look that up. Okay. Abuse, Bible meaning, to have improper sexual relationships with themselves. It's expressing not. That's the thing. Nowadays, with everyone wanting to be a scholar, Leviticus 20:13. If a man also lie with a man, as he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. And so basically that's the abusers of themselves with mankind. So if a man also lie with mankind, okay, as he lies with a woman, so obviously it's talking about homosexuality there. In 1 Corinthians 6:9 it says, nor abusers of themselves with mankind, or with other men. So there are these references that go back to the Old Testament. So someone who, like Paul, who understood the Old Testament, he would have just been quoting something and saying, because he was traveling through Greece, he knew that there were cultures that had this type of thing as a virtue, a bit like what's happening today. And so he would have been describing this. And so that, like the New King James has nor homosexuals nor sodomites, where the King James has nor effeminate nor abusers of themselves in mankind. And so this is where people say, oh, well, the word homosexual is only a new word. It's only just coming to play. But the LXX uses the phrase arsenos koitan. And so this is in Leviticus 20:13. Paul uses arsenokoitai. And so it's basically just joining these two words together. So it's obviously related back to that, even if you can just look at the LXX, which oftentimes is just a translation of the Hebrew. It's not always accurate, but when you look at something like this, it's just basically two words that are joined together to formulate this one word. And so like in Jude 1, it talks about people who have gone after strange flesh. And so it's not, there's something strange about it. It's like foreign, something foreign, there's something wrong with it. There's something unnatural about it. And so that would relate to this as well. Obviously in Romans, it talks about this issue and says, men with men, women with women, they're giving themselves over to a reprobate mind. And so this is somewhere, like say with Stephen Anderson, him saying that homosexuals can't be saved. Well, they actually haven't become reprobate. They've given themselves over to a reprobate mind. The way you become reprobate is when you are going to be cast into hell. Okay. And so I believe that that's part of this, but it clearly says they're given over to a reprobate mind. So are they reprobate as well? Yes, I would say they are, but it does clearly say they're giving themselves over to a reprobate mind. Now, Paul himself said that he himself could become a reprobate. Now, I might even get that word up because I remember there was a friend of mine who had a lot of problems with this because he was listening to too much Steven Anderson. And so I was trying to help him out of this this whole issue. And so we did a study into the word reprobate and where it appeared. And I might actually get it on a Bible program, online Bible app, old school. Okay. I'll drag this across. And then I can just look up reprobate. Oh, that's because it's searching Hebrew. Reprobate, okay. All right, yeah, so the word only appears a few times. Reprobate silver, so that's the first mention of reprobate here. And we see in Romans, they're given over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. And then it has in 2 Timothy, corrupt minds, reprobate concerning the faith. And then it has a disobedient to every good work, reprobate. Okay, so, but if we look at 96, this is one of the great things about online Bible. It'll show you other places where it's translated. So not everywhere is it translated as reprobate. So God gave them over to a reprobate mind. That, listen to this, but I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest by any means, when I preach to others, I should be a castaway, or I should be a reprobate. It's the same word. Examine yourself whether in your faith, except you be reprobates. Okay, so that's obviously in the plurals. That's why it didn't come up. But it actually says to examine yourself. Do you know that Jesus Christ lives in you? If you don't know that, you're a reprobate. I trust that you shall know that we are not reprobates. It says, though we be as reprobates. So people are saying, well, you guys are the scum of the earth and all the rest of it. And so they're like, well, we're doing all this stuff, even though people are calling us reprobates. Corrupt minds, reprobate concerning the faith, in every good work, reprobate. That which bears thorns and briars is rejected. Okay, so that is the same word as reprobate. And so it's an interesting word. Adikimos, reprobate, castaway, rejected. So it's quite an interesting study, because what I did to help my friend out of this, because he was like, well, I'm reprobate, and Anderson says, if you're reprobate, just get a gun and shoot yourself. That's his advice. And so what a hero. Where I was like, no, even Paul said that he could become a reprobate. There are people some people are given, they don't like to retain God in their knowledge, and God gives them over to a reprobate mind. And so that's where Steven Anderson gets it wrong, and he says they get given over to being a reprobate. They get given over to a reprobate mind. They can repent and come back, and so that's the whole thing. So anyway, I don't want to rabbit trail too far. I'm not sure if we've got some comments here. Let's have a look. That's because they're not studying to retain and believe, but for translating. Yeah. So they want to be our teachers, but half the time they don't even know what they're teaching. Blind leading the blind. Abusers in Webster's 1828 defined it as sodomite. That's very interesting. Very interesting. Thanks for that. Ishati, yep. Just out of spite, they nitpick the scriptures. They do not study. If they did study, the Holy Spirit then guides. Yeah, and that's the thing. The Bible is very clear. You can't really understand the spiritual things of God but by the Holy Spirit. Now, I know there are people who have these arguments like, oh no, I know an atheist who knows the gospel and he knows this and that about the Bible, and it's like, seriously, I get talking to half of these people and they don't know hardly anything, especially the mysteries of God and things like that. They don't really know much. When you mentioned Steven Anderson, there's an interesting 96-minute video where he and another NIFB pastor talk about a new doco they had made called The Preserved Bible. Yeah, I saw this posted on the Confessional Bibliology Facebook page. And so it looks like it's going to be interesting. Straight away, like I think it was like a month or two ago, someone put up a little bit of a slot of that, a bit of a preview, and I looked at it and thought, that's Anderson straight away. It's just this sort of feel that you can just know. In this video, they raised some very good points regarding the KJV and archaic English, worth a watch. One special teaching, the new IFB, is the so-called reprobate doctrine using Romans 1 and 2, but omitting the other sins mentioned which qualifies as reprobate. And so this is one of the things. Don't add or subtract for the word of God, or else your part is taken from the book of life. I asked, or when I listened to Anderson talk about this, he was questioned about this. He just sort of said, well, that's sort of like a special category of people. And he just sort of vagued over it. Where to me, it's like, no, hang on. This is just as serious as taking the mark of the beast. They're saying your part is taken from the book of life. It's probably one of the clearest verses that says that your name can be taken or your part can be taken from the book of life. Because, Anderson sort of like you said the prayer, and then you can go off and shoot yourself if you want, because you go straight to heaven anyway. But I wouldn't recommend that. You should become a part of our church. And it's like, he's got these weird whole suicide things going on. And it's really strange. Imagine him knocking on your door and 1 minute he's saying you should really shoot yourself and because there's no hope for you. Imagine there's like two people at the door and he's saying to one person, well, you should just shoot yourself because you've been involved in homosexuality, so you need to just die because you're a reprobate. And then the other person's like, well, I haven't done that. Can I say a prayer? And it's like, yeah, say a prayer. And he's like, well, you can shoot yourself too because you go straight to heaven. And so you just have a mass suicide and Steven Anderson's just going, revival, hallelujah. It's strange. And his teaching is just causing massive problems in a lot of people. Now, I know he's TR or whatever, but it's like, I really didn't like the fact that that Dane had so much to do with Steven Anderson. I thought that there was enough in Steven Anderson to go separation. You know what I mean? Now, on Facebook groups and all that, it's like, who knows who is who? I've had people on there, I don't even know their name. Half the time they change their profile picture that much. I'm like, who am I talking to? And, some people, like, they contact me privately. I'm like, look, I'm really sorry, man, but I know I should probably know you, but I have no idea who you are. But anyway, let's just continue on.
Usage of this word in the Greek language. Now, that doesn't mean it didn't exist somewhere else. It just means it didn't occur. It doesn't appear in extant literature, right? So we don't know if it was being used in
This is the passage where Paul is going through a list of people who will not inherit the kingdom of heaven.
Exactly.
And one of the people that won't be are man beds.
Exactly. Whatever the heck that means, right? And people have made all kinds of different arguments about what it might mean.
So whatever the heck that means, like, can you imagine her walking in on the King James translators? They're speaking to each other in Latin about the fine details of Scrivener's text, Stephanus's text, and how Beza he had put a footnote about it. Then Erasmus did this, and how it's translated from the Dutch into English in the Coverdale edition, and talking about all this stuff. And she comes in, she's like, whatever the heck that means, it just shows. Sorry, I shouldn't really be eating and talking at the same time. I've just got these jelly beans and they're so nice. I've got 3 left. But yes, so Jennifer Knust, she has no idea what it means. Bart Ehrman's like, man beds. That's what it means. Ha ha ha. And so these guys don't know what the Greek language is. They don't know what this means. They have no idea. And so they're saying, well, if we can't figure it out, then no one can. Whatever the hell that means. So we're just making it up. And so obviously she's practicing what's called eisegesis. She's got a preconceived concept that the Bible doesn't say anything about homosexuality. So she's trying to squeeze this into the verse. And I think even in this version, she tried to squeeze this concept into this verse, but it didn't make it. I'm pretty sure that's what she says later on, but I could be wrong.
Maybe it means it's some kind of illicit sex between men. Maybe it's about some kind of exploitative sex between men. I mean, it could mean many different things. And there's no way to know. There is no way to know, because it first occurs in this context as in a list of vices. And frankly, lists of vices are not usually offered in order to be specific about the activity. I mean, that's true.
Right.
That's true in our own context. If we're going to slur someone, we're not like thinking about the exact activity. What we're doing is trying to use words that are mean to stick to somebody.
Well, that's right. And so
Paul was just being a meanie. How low has the Academy stooped by getting Jennifer Knust as a leader? But sometimes I'll type in King James Bible and it comes up and add the Queer Bible, and it's some Bible someone's written. I don't even know what it says, but it's just, I can't even be bothered with it. It's like having the Monty Python Bible, or it's just like a joke to me, But this is real. This is like a genuine Bible that people are going to be using. We're going to have people commenting on this Bible and quoting it to us and saying this is a better reading, and they're going to say, "Oh, the Bible says this," and they're going to be quoting Jennifer Knust and what she's put in the Bible, and it's just so weird, so strange. So hell loves the jelly beans. Nick could go check that what other English Reformation Bibles translate that as. Yeah, so I'll go through that. Textus Receptus. My site first, and then I go to the link here, compare. That way the Google like what I've done, and it likes what I've done, and it puts it into my website, into their good books. So where are we? 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 9. And so I've got in the 2016, nor effeminate nor abusers of themselves with mankind, which to me is just following the King James. Green says nor abusers nor homosexuals. Okay, so Bishops has nor weaklings nor abusers of themselves with mankind. Geneva has nor wantons nor buggerers. Neither weaklings, neither abusers of themselves with mankind. 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 Neither men that serve them mormetis, neither uterus. Doesn't sound very good. Whatever Wycliffe was talking about. And so, yeah, so it's good to go through those. And so obviously the King James has nor effeminate. So that's actually the word that I was talking about last time, the malakoi. So when Jesus says, what did you go into the wilderness to see? A king in soft clothing. That he's using the word malakoi there. And so malaka is usually a swear word. It's actually akin to like the C word, the swear word in English. It's also used for homosexual, malaka in modern Greek. And so, and I just know that from Greeks in Melbourne who I grew up with. They would use that all the time. That it's like it's like, people saying the F word, the C word, like I used to say every second word. They would say those words, they would say words that I shouldn't really repeat here, but that just means soft. And so obviously that's where you get the weakling concept from in some of these Bibles, but the King James has accurately put effeminate. And so basically most Reformation Bible translators can translate it, but they can't. Yeah, and so we're looking at a different word for effeminate there, but when it's abusers of themselves with mankind, it's or abusers of themselves with mankind, and it has or buggerers, neither abusers of themselves with mankind. And so, yeah, it's pretty solid all the way through. So King James Bible Sunday School says 1 Timothy 1:10. I'll just quickly look that up. We'll go to the King James. Backwards. For whoremongers, for them that defile themselves with mankind. Yeah, very good. Thanks for that. For men stealers, for liars. So yeah, I might actually just check the Greek out here. Or Greek, Scrivener, Snicotes. Okay, very interesting. Because they're saying it's Hapex legomenon. Where I assumed that because that's what I've heard a lot of. 1 Timothy 1:10. Let's have a look. Bible Hub. Okay, let's see if there's a difference in the Greek. Yeah. So Arsenocortes, I'll just see how many times this appeared, because they were saying it's a Hapex legomenon, but it actually appears twice. Yeah, for them that defile themselves with mankind or abusers of themselves with mankind. Okay, so it appears twice. There you go. So it's quite clear. I'll just check and see if there's any difference between the Greek editions. Just go to the parallel Greek because it's got a little bit more. Nope, they've all got it. Find, there it is. Every edition. So anyway, maybe I misheard them. Let's continue. But really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
We know it's something mean because it's in this list of vices, and people who like do whatever these man beds are doing is bad. This is the word that
it's something mean. Okay, so if you describe something in adultery, that it's mean to say that.
It's sometimes gets translated and understood as homosexual. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's correct.
And so people just assume it means homosexual, but in fact, it could, maybe, but not really even maybe. I mean, I think you and I.
No, I say no. It definitely doesn't mean that.
It absolutely cannot mean homosexual.
Absolutely cannot mean that. Yeah. Right.
Okay, so she's saying it's absolutely can't mean that. All right. Well, I'm just going to have to put that down a little bit. No, that's fine. Okay, so let's have a look at, like, say, even here. So that they're saying the NIV is wrong. New Living Translation has there written homosexuality, homosexuals. So they're saying pretty much everything is wrong. And even the New King James uses the word sodomites for where it says them that defile themselves with mankind. Homosexuals. So Bart Ehrman and Jennifer Knust are in absolute 100% agreement that everything is wrong, and they're correct. How's this? Okay, so this is in 1 Timothy. Let's go to 1 Corinthians. Just bypass everything and come up here. Okay, nor men who have sex with men. That would be a homosexual. Homosexuality, homosexual acts, homosexuals, King James, nor abusers of themselves with mankind, nor are homosexuals, nor sodomites, nor adulterers, nor homosexuals. So they're saying it can't be that, but everything that the Academy has put out has that. Christian Standard Bible doesn't. Yes, it does. Or males who have sex with males, homosexuality, nor abusers of themselves with men. The American Standard Version follows the King James a little bit there. So yeah, it's quite interesting. For them to be wordsmiths, they seem like they're looking into dictionary definitions. Yeah. One of the definitions for the etymology of abuser is ravisher. Now that's interesting. Wiktionary gives this as the etymology, contrary to what Bart and Jen are saying. From arson, from male, koi, omicron, grade, stem, kame, lie, and taste, masculine genitive suffix, thus a male who lies with males. There you go. And that's Wiktionary, which is like anyone, that's not Christian. Anyone can get on there, and as long as it's credible and from a good dictionary. So I might even I won't go there. Ishati says, also in reference to forbidden sexual situations from the early 15th century, but originally meaning incest, masturbation, self-abuse, homosexuality, prostitution, etc. from 1550s, specifically as to misuse, sexually ravish. But the Old English Dictionary, 2nd edition, marks this obsolete, and the modern use subject someone to unwanted sexual activity is likely a fresh coinage from the late 20th century, specifically of drugs from 1968. So that's the etymology. So that's why I actually like to use the old Oxford English Dictionary, the one on archive, rather than some of the modern ones, because sometimes they're just trying to put a modern spin on it. And sometimes, too, they want to put a modern spin on anachronistically on certain periods of time, and I've seen them do that. Okay, so let's get back to the video, but I really appreciate your input, guys. It's been great, because a lot of this stuff, I wouldn't have gone down this path if you hadn't shown me all this. So it's a really good study, which helps a lot of people watching too, because they're like, oh, sometimes I go, oh, I'm going to do this video and I don't have anything planned, and I've watched this like 2 weeks ago and so I've pretty much forgotten what they talked about. But let's just keep going through. So we've got about 10 minutes to go. So we should be able to get through this pretty quickly.
It absolutely does not mean that.
Yeah,
and it occurs
for reason other than man bent. I mean, it has to do with, in the ancient world, like the term homosexual would have made no sense to anybody. I mean, there wouldn't be a concept.
There was no category of a person who ontologically, desired men. That wasn't a thing. So that doesn't exist.
It just wasn't a thing. And you just got to believe Bart and Jen, because they're the gurus, Asheti says, and 1 on 1550 seems pretty consistent with the Bible. Yeah. And 15th century. It absolutely cannot mean that. Wow, what a postmodern scholarly position. Is this the Bible scholars of the future? Oh my, I want the rapture to happen now. But aren't they being a bit staunch? I mean, we have this type of staunchness when we're saying, well, the Bible says this. And Mark Ward will pull us over the coals and call us an absolutist, But these guys are absolutely sure that this can never mean this. But see, Mark Ward's actually done a video, saying that this is what it means. And so, but isn't he being a bit absolutist? So you can be absolutist with a definition of words, apparently, according to Mark Ward, but not with the text. You just got to be vague about that, It's so bizarre. So strange. What a strange world. Yeah, I wish the rapture would happen right now. That'd be awesome. So the Greeks didn't practice homosexuality. Well, it's just same-sex love, Like they men didn't work out naked in gymnasiums, ancient Greeks. Yeah. They are meaning absolutists. Yeah. So we're textual absolutists, they're meaning absolutists, which they would throw us under the bus, because I'm like, well, Easter is correct, it's in the King James, blah, blah, blah. Unicorn is correct, because, and they would throw me under the bus and say I'm an absolutist for those things. Aren't these guys absolutists? Isn't Mark Ward an absolutist for saying it can only mean sort of the thing that he's talking about?
As a concept.
There were men who did desire men, but there wasn't a concept that this kind of phenomenon exists. So they didn't have a sense of sexuality, orientation, or anything like that to even allow for
desire was not understood the same way.
Yeah, right.
Completely on board with you. We are totally in agreement on this point.
Okay, 100% agreement. I agree with Bart Ehrman on this, but I'm against every Bible version ever, sort of thing. I'm against every other biblical scholar. This is the new. These are the new style translators. This is they're going to bring out the new readings that you want to memorize. Wouldn't you want to memorize a Bible written by these type of people? Can you imagine it?
And,
yeah. So, but when you come across a word like that, you just take your best guess. I mean, you got to use another word, right? I would translate. I'll tell you, my biggest problem with translation, Jenny, was when I was trying to translate the Apostolic Fathers, and I'd come across a word, and I was used to doing this with a group of PhD students, and you'd say, well, it could mean this, could mean that, could be that, and you kind of come up with a bunch of things. But then when you're doing translation, you got to type a word, right?
Yeah.
And you can't say it could mean this, and that. So how do you just, I mean, how do you, 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 you just, I me take a good guess?
No, I mean, what we ended up doing, and I felt that was this agreed with me. I agree with myself, this decision, was that we ended up deciding as a board to translate that word as men who have illicit sex, footnote, meaning of Greek uncertain, for exactly this reason. Yeah. We know Paul's saying something
meaning of Greek uncertain. So men who have illicit sex. Illicit. It's like, so I guess Mark Ward is going to, like, what's illicit? You know, how do you translate? Is he going to do a video on this and say it's a false friend or something? Alec Cox says, Bart Ehrman is a professor at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. As a leading Greek scholar, imagine that. He teaches New Testament studies. Imagine that. Come with Jesus. Yeah. How these people can even be considered worthy to be in a Christian, to be working with the Bible, to be in the academy, and let alone all these apologists looking up to these guys. This is the deplorable state of Christianity. Apologists going out and saying, trying to convert atheists with these type of people at the helm of, hey, this is the new Bible coming out. We've been working with the Vatican, and we've been working with Jennifer Knust and Bart Ehrman and these other people, and here's a new Bible, and we come along, we're like, no, we're sticking with the Reformation Bibles, King James, that's good, we're sticking with that. And they're like, oh, you're in a cult. And that's why I say, why isn't James White doing a bunch of videos on Jennifer Knust and Tommy Wasserman and 50 of the other people in the academy? Take your best guess. Yeah, Bart Ehrman's like, what do you do? Just you got to write something down. Do you just get a dartboard and you throw it? Really, they, Ward and others, are really saying that it's fine to be negative absolutists, just not positive absolutists. Yeah, because they're pretty certain that 1 John 5:7 is not in there. Absolutely certain, actually. So they're absolutists, just backwards. It's the same thing. It's you got the one coin there. It's the positive side or the negative side. Well, we want it in, they want it out, but they're certain it shouldn't be in there. Principe adulterae certainly shouldn't be in there. Can't believe thus saith the Lord, but can say that word can't possibly mean, and the original text definitely didn't read that way. Yeah, if you go around just saying thus saith the Lord, you're an ignorant bozo, all the rest of it, but you're a credentialed scholar if you say, well, we don't know, we just put in the margin, we can't understand what the Greek means because we're English monolinguals and we can't understand what the Greek says. They don't want a Bible that condemns the Rainbow Coalition. That's why I believe they don't want to touch that and say it means that. Yeah. And I mean, see, Bart, he will try to upset Christians as much as he can because he knows that we're forgiving and we turn the other cheek and all the other stuff. But there's certain religious groups that he is not coming against. He might say a few things here and there when pressed, but he's not actively writing books about it, is he? You know what I mean? Like, and yeah, there is a huge agenda behind this. Behind this. As you were checking, a lot of modern Bibles from 30 years ago translated the word homosexuals, but it can't possibly mean that now. Yeah, because society's changed, and so we have to word it different. Like I was saying about the 1984, it's 1 plus, does 2 plus 2 equal 4, or does it equal 5? Well, they've said it equals 5 now. Okay, well, change everything. It equals 5. And you're like, but it equals 4. And they're like, you idiots. Don't you realize it equals 5? And then soon it'll be it equals 3. And you're like, but it's when it equals all of them all at the same time. That's when you're just like, oh, whatever you say, you scholars. We bow down to you. Whatever you tell us, we will worship you. Whatever you tell us, it means. What does it mean, Bart? I've heard people ring up James White and say, well, you've said that this is wrong and this is wrong. What does it mean? What does this word mean? And then James White's like, yes, I am God. I'm going to tell you what it means, what my opinion is, because that's the highest thing out there is my brain, Didn't Paul quote, thus saith the Lord? The Rainbow Club has been cultivating this in society for decades. Now they have the government officials that are rainbow and letting them do as that wilt. Yeah, I can't believe some of the stuff that's coming out of the United States, but here in Australia, it's pretty wild. And yeah, you can't apparently say anything. I thought it was just you just voted, and you just sort of, oh well, people can do whatever they want, and you voted them. But now you have to celebrate it. Like, I mean, if I wanted to say, like, marry my dad, just say I was like, okay, I'm going to marry my dad, and we're going to adopt 3 boys, and we're going to live on a ranch, and but I love my dad, and we're intimate. You don't have to agree that that's good, and so this is one of the arguments that I bring up when I'm talking to people of this persuasion, and they say, oh, that's disgusting. And I'm like, well, who are you to say what's disgusting and what's not? I think it's great. How come you're against it? How come you're an incestophobe? Why are so many people incestophobes? Isn't that just who wrote the rule book to say that there is, this is good and that's bad? If you guys can say, hey, we think what we're doing is good, well, how come I can't say what I think I'm doing is good? And yeah, it's just quite amazing. They completely agree. Bedfellows, Vatican, NA, UBS, Metzger, Martini, Knust, Ehrman, NRSV, and their text is received by James White, Mark Ward, and most modern evangelical scholars. Yeah. Yes, what a mess. What a mess. Alex Cox, get the rat cage out. 2 + 2 = 5. But do you really mean it? Yes. I don't believe you. Hungry rat ready. Yep, they'll cancel you. You will be cancelled. Your life will be destroyed. That you'll lose your job if you say the wrong number. But 10 years ago it was this number. No. And this is one of the strangest answers to questions where people say, but it's 2023. So, like, just by stating the date, that solves everything. It's like, yeah, it's 2023, and things are still the same as 100 years ago, 500 years ago. Morals don't change, Killing is still killing, Back in the latter 90s or early 2000s, I visited my cousin who graduated from Furman in SC, founded by that excellent preacher. And we had a small discussion about the fact that modern versions, and so, yeah, he's just continuing on there. So I'll leave that one up there, and we'll go back to the video, and we'll come back to it.
Yeah. When we know he's saying something mean about men, yeah, but beyond that, we don't know.
Men in bed. Something involving men in bed.
Okay, I'll just finish these few. We're diminishing the Bible's condemnation of homosexuality. She defended modern versions by saying that she could not still find the condemnation in the modern versions. Heard that before, but that's the point. Yeah. Yeah, I've seen the same thing. Where I'm pretty sure in the NIV it has homosexual offenders. So some people are actually saying people who offend homosexuals are in sin. And so they're diminishing doctrines here and there. Then they claim it's only in one place. Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out the 1 Timothy thing, because I thought this was a hapex legomenon, because they brought that up then they brought this one up, which is sort of like, I'll have to actually go back through that and not live here, but just check and see if they were claiming that this was a hapax legomenon. Okay, so Isheti says, mainly the left in the US are promoting the rainbow doctrine and protecting it because that they are that themselves and are taking order from the World Economic Forum. Most of the politicians in office that support the Rainbow Coalition because they are that way themselves and want society to accept it so they can have a clear conscience about it. Yeah.
In beds doing something, but what we don't know.
I think it's actually a pretty good decision.
I thought so too. I was happy with that. I do. I thought that
it's a good decision.
That was a good decision. And what we didn't like, and I think rightly so, was what the NRSV had.
What did they have?
They had sodomites.
No, the NRSV did?
They did. I mean, it's shockingly bad because it's anachronistic. It's so bad that it's like, it makes me cringe. I don't care what your perspective is. It's so bad. It's on the worst translation and so bad. And so we got rid of that and tried to be as clear as possible that this is really an uncertain word because it is a hapax legomenon.
And let me just say,
wow, she is saying it's a hapax legomenon. That it only appears one time, but it appears twice in the critical text and the TR. So these guys are factually wrong here. She's factually wrong, and she's like, one of the experts on it in progressive land. So yeah, that would be an interesting thing to look into, whether she or whether they define a hapax legomenon as it only appears in the Bible. It doesn't appear in other works of that time, but the very fact that it appears elsewhere in the Bible and it's translated in a certain way obviously defines that word clearly. If it's a hapax legomenon, yes, there can be problems. And what I found is because the King James translators actually said, there could be the rare bird, or there could be a stone, or could be something that we're not really sure about. So every bird, every stone, everything is just question mark. People are going through and question mark every single one of them. You go, see, they didn't know. And then it's like anytime where there's a word that appears only once, put a question mark there. And that's where Mark Ward's spit, the tapeth, it's like it sounds like spit, so it must mean spit. And so they've put question marks against that. At any time where there's just a word that appears once, they question marked it. But they're saying clearly this is a hapax legomenon, and it's not. It's not according to the biblical category, as far as I'm aware. And so I'll just continue with this.
Hey, now that you told me that, I just want everybody to know I had nothing to do with the NRSV. Wow, sodomite.
Sodomite.
Whoa. All right.
No, it's so bad. Like, whoa.
Yeah, well, we could have a whole thing about why that's bad because it's on a lot of different levels. So
I have a thing in Bible Odyssey. I had to write a thing about it in Bible Odyssey because we got in a lot of trouble for translating this as menueval illicit sex footnote, meaning of Greek uncertain. Like really? when the initial release happened, a bunch of people wrote the NRSV update edition board and protested that decision. And so I wrote something about this is why.
Bible Odyssey is this online thing sponsored by the Society of Biblical Literature that people can just Google Bible Odyssey. They have articles on stuff like this, and they could
exactly. And so I wrote the one about man beds.
Man beds, okay, yeah. Okay. Did these people who protested have an alternative that they were suggesting, or they just didn't like your?
They thought we weren't mean enough. They wanted us to be meaner in our translation.
Go after some specific.
Mean. So if the Bible says adultery is bad, okay, you're just being mean. You're mean. Murder. You're mean. It's not. No, something is God's standard. See, this is the deplorable state. And see, here's Mark Ward. He's an evangelist to the King James onlyists like us. Get TR only, King James. He says we're all the same anyway. Why isn't he having a ministry to these guys? to Jennifer Knust, the Jennifer Knust Ministries. We're gonna reach out to these people and tell them the Bible is real, the Bible is true, and it was written by God. Why doesn't he do a whole bunch of videos about that? And so obviously he's done one on Arsenal Coites, which I take my hat off to him and go, yeah, good on you, mate. But it's like, I just find that this isn't the sort of thing that apologists, that they don't really want to bite that their master's hand. That they know that these are the guys who are giving them the Bible. These are the guys who are supporting their bibliology and their position. And so do you really want to start looking in their backyard and pointing out their things when the atheist can just see that, oh, you're not even trusting the people who are giving you the very Bible? But how can you trust that there's not 10 other people like Bart and like Jenny who have been working on the NA 29th, and they're going to change this word or put some other alternative in there, or, probably not that, but who knows? Well, why is the word sodomite constantly changed in like the NIV to shrine prostitutes? What's that? A shrine prostitute? So I'm going to try and read through these fast. While it's in at least 2, in this case, for instance, that's what's going on. 30 years later, it can't possibly mean what they're saying. Yeah, I read that. Correct translation, abuser means sodomite. Sodomite is the correct translation, nothing worse, because that also includes children of any age. Sickening. See, they're scared to touch the Rainbow Coalition. Just look at their reaction when she said that again. Yeah. It was the Rainbow Coalition that was probably the ones protesting. Yeah. Some modern scholars consider 1 Timothy to be a forgery, hence the Apex comment. Oh, wow, that's really interesting. Thanks for your input there. Wow, yes, because Bart Ehrman's obviously written, forged. He says, 2 Peter couldn't have been written by an amanuensis. It couldn't have been Peter, because they quote the Septuagint in such a fanciful way and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, no. And, Peter, you can never get someone who's just a tradesman, like, or a fisherman who could be educated. These guys hung around Jesus for 3 years. Like during that time, they were just sort of standing around like baboons looking at each other. They were probably sharing information, writing down things. I think the Hebrew culture was very literate. The whole way the Torah is set up is for people to be literate. The whole way the Psalms are set up are for people to be literate. I mean, Psalm 119, the acrostic way that's written, so people can learn the alphabet, so people can spell, so people can know these things. I'm not saying that they were educated as the Pharisees or the Sanhedrin were, but they obviously were more educated than what Bart Ehrman makes it. Like, they're just dumb fishermen, they're just idiots, bozos. And but here we are looking at their credentials, and they're saying you can't translate Greek. Okay, so it's quite amazing. Yeah, so that's really interesting. The Hapex Legomenon. It's a Hapex Legomenon because we don't think that 1 Timothy is a viable version. It's not the word of God. It's a fake. But and so I'm pretty sure Jennifer Knust probably believes that as well. But it would be interesting if you were to get a mic and corner them and say, so do you believe, that 1 Timothy is legitimately the word of God? That should be like, she'd either have to say, no, it's not, and that's why we believe it's a case of Hapex Legomenon, or she'd have to say that she was wrong, or, what would she say? Alec Cox says, they say that they were illiterate monkeys. Such lies. They were much smarter in their business and in their language skills. You can see how satisfied these two are when they're able to invalidate scripture passages and even whole books. It's so convenient for them. Yeah, and I can tell she's, getting the bottom teeth thing happening with her. She really wants to get rid of this type of thing, scrap it from the Bible. So it's probably her lifelong goal is to get rid of this rubbish out of Scripture.
Specific group they didn't like.
Exactly. Like, they don't like this group, so let's go after him. I'm like, okay, that's a good reason to translate something the right way, so you can be mean.
Yeah.
Be mean. That's a good reason to translate something, so you can be mean. Can you just feel the toxicity there? This is pretty wild. Okay, let's continue.
Right, exactly. But I want to end this with a final question. There are people in our world today who still think that the King James Version is the best translation, and they don't see any reason to read newer translations. And I don't mean anything specific about the NRSV or anything, just kind of generally. Is there a problem in just reading the King James, or is there a reason to read something that's a recent translation, or is there a reason to read? So just generally in your view.
So I think I like to read the King James Version. I think the King James Version is a beautiful translation. It's
I hate the whole thing. It's a beautiful translation. It's like it's something that they absolutely despise when it comes down to individual readings, when it comes down to the text, when it comes down to the translators. And here we would be looking at a whole bunch of white old guys who did it. So that's just, it's the worst thing that can ever happen, is a bunch of white old guys do something. It's like, it should be thrown straight in the bin. But yeah, I love the King James. They love it. I really wish someone would just come out and be honest and say, I think it should be thrown under the bus. We should just get rid of it. I think we need to scrap it. I think it's an aberration. Like half the time they end up saying that anyway at the end. So why this? I love it. Why? Do you like this puppy? Oh, I love it. It's so cuddly. It's so nice. But we've got to put it down. I'm going to bash it to death with a hammer. Watch this. Smash, smash. But I love it. Look, it's still fluffy. It's, it's like, no, you're destroying it. Yeah, that was a really good call. Kept hearing all ages about the forgery issue. And so I recently just went back through Forged and read that probably about 6 months ago. But yeah, it's quite an amazing concept. Half of the New Testament is just forged. What a joke. Homosexuality was not accepted in the West until this century. Homosexuality was condemned when those Bibles were translated. Here comes the boom. So it seems they have a bad view of history. But she cringes at the word sodomite, but would surely cringe at this place. But she loves the King James. I don't even think the people who say this read the Bible, let alone the King James. Yeah, it's just sort of like, we don't want to upset the Christians. We know they love that, but we've just got to. And some people fall for this. Like, this is the Mark Ward type of thing. Oh, I love the King James Bible, and then he just makes video after video against it, and against people who really do like it. And so,
the one that my grandmother knew, and so it reminds me of my grandma. And I have no problem. I have no objection to reading the King James Version. My objection would be to thinking that the King James Version is an accurate translation of exactly what God said. I mean, that doesn't make sense, because the King James Version, like every translation, comes out of a historical context. It uses this archaizing English from our perspective, right? So the English has changed, just like Greek changed. English changed, and King James's English is not the English we use in the United States in 2022.
Really?
And so it offers a misimpression of the language that's used in the New Testament, which is not an elevated language by and large, right? So it sounds to us when we hear thy and thou and thee and whatever, that like we're talking in some kind of, we're pretending to be Shakespeare or something, I don't know. And so it makes us think that the New Testament's in this elevated language, but it's not. It's written in a very kind of coarse Greek by and large. And so it's a misimpression if that's all we're reading. So that's that. And then it also,
just reminds me of, you know, some of these, you know, like, just the way she's talking. It's a misimpression, like a teenager sort of talking about something they have. Remember there was that lady and she was asked a question. I've got to Google this, where it was like, she was asked about like third world countries. Let's have a look. I think some of you guys know the one I'm talking about, where there's like Miss America or something. They're asking her a question. Yeah. Here we go. I'm just hoping this isn't copyrighted, because that would really... Okay, well, this sort of went viral, so I don't think it's copyrighted, but this is what it sounds like.
This is a round of competition that ultimately determines their fate, the make it or break it moment. Good luck. We begin with South. Thank you. Judge number 5, Amy Teagarden.
Recent polls have shown a fifth of Americans can't locate the U.S. on a world map. Why do you think this is?
I personally believe that U.S. Americans are unable to do so because some people out there in our nation don't have maps, and I believe that our education, like such as in South Africa and the Iraq, everywhere like such as, and I believe that they should, our education over here in the U.S. should help the U.S. or should help South Africa and should help the Iraq and the Asian countries, so we will be able to build up our future for our...
Thank you very much, South Carolina.
I'm just going to rewind it. This little bit here just reminded me of it.
Archaizing English from our perspective, right? So the English has changed, just like Greek changed. English changed, and you know, King James's English is not the English we use in the United States in 2022, and so it offers a misimpression of the language that's used in the New Testament, which is not an elevated language by and large, right? So it sounds to us when we hear thy and thou and thee and whatever, that like we're talking in some kind of, we're pretending to be Shakespeare or something, I don't know, and so it makes us think that the New Testament's in this elevated language, but it's not. It's written in a very kind of coarse Greek by and large. And so it's a misimpression if that's all we're reading. So that's that. And then it also, I don't know. I mean, it also uses a Greek text that most scholars would not accept as the best Greek text at this point. It is a Greek text, you know, that was an important Greek text for Protestants. You know, as that text came forward in the invention of the printing press through the Protestant Reformation, that became the Protestant text. It's called the Textus Receptus, or the received text, and that's the Greek text that's behind the King James Version. So it is a historically valid Protestant text behind the King James Version, but it's not the Greek text that one would find in a critically edited New Testament that we use today.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, to the extent there are actually some important verses that are in the King James, because it was in the Greek text they're translating, that today most scholars say, yeah, those weren't originally there, and so
exactly.
But also, yeah, and at a deeper level too, other than just verses here and there. So, okay, well, that's really helpful. It's nice to have somebody who's been recently involved with this entire process to tell us about it, because it really is a complicated thing, and it's more.
It was such a privilege. I just want to make that clear. Like, it was complicated, and not every decision went my way, but it was such a privilege to be part of that committee. I mean, and to listen to the book editors and to listen to the other members of the committee and to try to be as responsible as possible to all of these various constituencies who care so deeply about these texts. It was an incredible experience, and I feel so lucky that I was part of it. I just want to say that, and really hats off to Mike Holmes, who was the other general editor, and to all the book editors who did such beautiful work. And frankly, they can't be thrilled because a lot of the stuff they recommended didn't happen. So I hope they'll all yell at us, because they all made great suggestions that we couldn't incorporate in the end for all kinds of reasons. So it was a great experience.
Well, I'm glad, and it's it's important work. The National Council of Churches is the one who owns the copyright to this.
Exactly.
I mean, we're talking about the largest collection of Christian churches in America, and it's an entire group. And so this is the translation that they officially endorse and fund, but they endorse.
The largest group of churches under an umbrella, World Council of Churches in America, and they're going to go with this edition. So, and that's the thing. And people wonder why I say, Christianity is just going down the gurgler. So Alec Cox says they want to change history. Google has been doing that for years. People who defend sodomy are usually closeted sodomites. Alec Cox, that became more manifest about Google 2 years ago. So kids weren't taught Shakespeare in public schools. People don't say without further ado. People don't say straight and narrow anymore. What the Miss America lady, people don't say the apple of my eye, shaking my head. The thee, thou, thine, ye separates who is being talked to. Yeah. Golly, gee gone, I don't know. This is expected from these two since they're unbelievers. Yeah, they're not Christians, so we expect this type of thing. But it's when apologists and other people just start parroting this sort of stuff, you're just left there going, wow, what wisdom from Knust, expert of the Bible.
Endorse it, and so it makes a big difference when you're on that committee, because you're influencing how people understand the Bible, and
which is a huge responsibility, And I mean, Bart, you do this professionally too, right? You want to be as fair and accurate and just as possible in how you represent what you're reading and why you're making the decisions that you're making, and you do the best you can. But we're human. I mean, I think that's one of the things to remember when we're reading any translation, is that human beings made these translations, in all of our.
Well, she thinks human beings made the Bible. She doesn't think God had anything to do with it. So
our situatedness and imperfection, and yet also our sincere effort to be responsible to the jobs that we've been entrusted to undertake.
Yeah. Well, that's a great way to end it. So thanks, Jenny. I really appreciate it. And
thanks, Bart.
So it's been really great. Okay, so good luck, and I suggest not taking on the translation project anytime soon. It's too much work.
I definitely am not going to. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for listening in, and we will have another.
I hope they don't take on any other translational work anytime soon.
Very interesting episode soon as well, next week. Okay. Thanks a lot.
This has been an episode of Misquoting Jesus with Bart Ehrman. We'll be back with a new episode next Tuesday, so please be sure to subscribe to our show for free on your favorite podcast listening app.
So, like, to me, seeing Bart Ehrman's head here, it's just like seeing a Jehovah's Witness who just knows a lot of bibliology. And if you go to the jw.org site, the Jehovah's Witness site, they've got lots written about the Bible. There's a guy who I actually look at, he's a Jehovah. Father's True Monarchy. I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah, this guy, he's always talking against like 1 John 5:7. Pretty much that's his whole thing. But it's interesting. You go through, he's talking about Simonides here. Talking about 1 John 5:7, Codex Sinaiticus and Constantine Simonides, the forging of Codex Sinaiticus. And so this guy's a Jehovah's Witness. And so I like to go here and go, oh, he's talking about that, and then read through the information and go, well, obviously he's going to read that with the bias, or sometimes he's in complete agreement because these people are Unitarians. But yeah, he'll have close-ups and all sorts of things on his site. I've actually haven't seen a lot of this for probably about 4 or 5 months. It's been a while since I've jumped on here, but I do spend a bit of time on this guy's site, or I have done in the past. So yeah, we're going to finish up here. So just a few more comments. After all, Nebuchadnezzar did write Daniel chapter 4. Yeah. What's sad is, like these two, Christians can't believe that God worked a miracle by allowing flawed, imperfect men to make a translation of his word perfectly. And that's the thing, like people say the whole concept of trying to make out that we believe in a secondary inspiration is simply because they want to demonize us and say, well, it's just a work of man. A translation is just a work of man, sort of thing. Yeah, that's true. It does take effort from men. But God also promised that he would preserve his words. So they're going to be somewhere. You're going to be able to find them somewhere. And you can find all the words of God in the King James Bible. And so when you read James Price's material, he was the main guy for the Old Testament for the New King James. And he's like, why would I follow a text that was written by fallible men? It's like, okay. And so, in other words, what, your text is infallible? Or it's like they just have this concept of like the King James is, or the TR is written by fallible people, like we're claiming that they have inspiration. And my JWs are just hostile. Yeah, they're pretty wild. Both these regard biblical scholarship as a profession, like being a professional violin player or architect. Yeah, that's about it. But they're not they're good at what they do, just like a Jehovah's Witness is good at what they do with the Watchtower, with the Awake, with their other, with quoting that Jesus is Michael the Archangel and not believing in the Trinity and all sorts of things. That they get better and better at that every year. But when it comes to the truth, like even listening to Jennifer Knust, she's like, oh, the thee, thou, thy thing. It's like, it's like she doesn't, like, I sit down and I read the King James, I go through it, and I am working on editions of 2016 edition and things like that, and going through what words mean and studying, looking up hard words, archaic words and things like that. But it's almost like she's just looked at the cover and gone, oh, I've heard this is really hard to read, or she's heard it preached for a little bit, and she's like, oh, thee, thou, thy. It's just so awkward. It's like for a Bible editor to make these type of comments is just, it just shows you their illiteracy. That they're illiterate in Greek, they're illiterate in English literature. Wouldn't you think that someone who's doing a Bible translation, a modern Bible translation, would say, yeah, I've read the King James through dozens of times, and I understand where they're coming from, but we have a different text. You know, like someone like James White would probably, you know, sort of say that sort of thing. But this Jennifer Knust, it was like that, you know, Miss South Carolina or whatever it was, just getting up, just sort of fudging her way through half of these questions, because we know that Bart Ehrman, you know, he will put anyone over the coals, no matter who they are, and so he did it to her as well, which is good. But they're pretty much birds of a feather. So anyway, guys, I'm going to split. It's been nearly 3 hours. Thanks for sticking with us through this video, and we'll see you again soon. God bless you. I'll finish my jelly beans.